Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McMillan.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the first portfolio is indeed Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. I remind members that questions 3 and 6 are grouped together, and therefore I'll take any supplementaries on these questions after both have been answered. And at question number 1, I call Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First of all, I want to apologise to the Chamber that I do have to leave midway through the session, as I previously indicated to the Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it provide an update on the Empire, Slavery and Scotland's Museum Steering Group and its work to consider Scotland's involvement in empire, colonialism and historic slavery, and how this can be addressed using museum collections and museum spaces, including the potential for a standalone slavery or human rights museum.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
Presiding Officer, with your indulgence, may I begin by welcoming Dr Christopher Kalila, the Chair of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, the CPA, to our proceedings this afternoon. Dr Kalila is from Zambia, one of Scotland's partner countries. We're honoured that he is following these proceedings. Thank you. Turning to Mr McMillan's question, since publishing its recommendations in 2022, the Empire, Slavery and Scotland's Museum Steering Group has inspired significant action. Through the Delivering Change programme, Museums Gallery Scotland is supporting 17 museums, 97 sector professionals and has awarded £200,000 to 7 community partners. Over 300 people have received training. The Scottish Government also has committed £100,000 to establish a new organisation with its inaugural exhibition scheduled for the 1st of October. Museums Gallery Scotland also support repatriation, guidance, sector events and research directly addressing the call for systemic change and inclusive practice.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply. And bearing in mind that the recommendations made by the Empire, Slavery and Scotland's Museum Steering Group, does the Scottish Government still consider a standalone facility to be a viable option, and what discussions have the Scottish Government undertaken with companies who now own sugar processing and refining in these islands for them to engage with the history of the industry?
Cabinet Secretary.
Work towards the creation of a dedicated space will be for the leadership of the new organisation, and this includes determining the location. The Scottish Government encourages all individuals and organisations with historical links to colonialism and slavery, including those involved in sugar processing and refining, to engage meaningfully with their past. This is essential to ensure that any future representation of Scotland's role in the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism reflect the most accurate and inclusive picture possible.
And supplementary for the Treasury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary for an update on its work with museums to promote its anti-racist education and how this is being integrated into efforts to decolonise the curriculum in Scottish schools ahead of Black History Month?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I begin, because it gives me an opportunity to do so, to pay tribute to Sir Geoff Palmer, who I know was a close friend of Faisal Chowdhury, and Professor Palmer played an outstanding role in the recent history of Scotland coming to terms with its past. I think it's really important that we learn the lessons of Scotland's history, that it is made relevant in our schools, and that we embrace the challenge, as we have done in my tenure, for example. We've seen, amongst other things, the return of a commemorative community pole to the Nisga'a people in British Columbia in Western Canada. That fits very much within my sense of embracing and understanding our past. I'll be happy to write to Mr Chowdhury with some more details, but I would wish to take the opportunity to put on record my appreciation to Professor Palmer, Mr Chowdhury's friend, who incidentally also served on the steering group in relation to Scotland's diaspora.
Question number 2, Daniel Johnson.
Asked the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the work of the Creative Industries Leadership Group.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Creative Industries Leadership Group works to articulate the needs and realise the potential of Scotland's creative industries, providing advice to ministers. I co-chaired a meeting of the Creative Industries Leadership Group on the 4th of September 2025, and while the note will be published on the Scottish Government website in due course, it was an opportunity for shared intelligence gathering, understanding where the sector considers they are underdeveloped and where there are opportunities for the Scottish Government to continue to support the growth of this key sector.
Daniel Johnson.
Can I echo the Cabinet Secretary's welcome to the Chair of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association before I ask my supplementary? It's welcome that the meeting was convened on the 5th of September. The Cabinet Secretary will know that the previous meeting to that was in March 2022, and certainly at the point that I was doing my research for this question, the Chair was still slated as Neil Gray. But we also know that, according to the government's own statistics, that the number of creative industries enterprises is lower than it was 10 years ago. So can I ask what the government is doing to increase that number? And might it be an idea to schedule these meetings more frequently than once every 3 years?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm very much in favour of meeting more regularly, and I made that clear to the creative sector. I think one of the areas where government can be helpful is in the ambition of internationalising Scotland's creative sector. So at our meeting we talked at some length about the network of Scottish Government offices internationally, about the more than 30 locations where Scottish Development International is cited, and the more than 1,400 global Scots around the world who can help promote the creative sector and the rest of Scotland's economy. And then, of course, there is the Brand Scotland initiative, which I chair, and brings together Scotland's public sector organisations that promote sectors such as that of the creative industries. And I've committed to them to make sure that we use all of these different routes to promote the creative sector internationally, as well as everything else that has been done domestically.
Supplementary, Paul McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's vital we continue working to support, grow and realise the potential of Scotland's creative industries sector, including by Scotland's reputation internationally. Can the Cabinet Secretary say any more about the work to ensure Scotland's leading cultural reputation and valuable contribution to our economy?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think one of the areas where I have very high hopes is the potential for a Scottish Cultural Export Office working together with the Scottish Government offices internationally, the SDI network and the Global Scots right around the world. Scotland has a tremendous cultural offering, but I do think that one of the lessons both of the COVID experience and also Brexit is that there has been a significant challenge for younger performers wishing to tour more, wishing to have more international experience. I think we can and do more in that area, and that's why funding is being allocated to look into the opportunities for a cultural export office, which I know has been warmly welcomed by the likes of the Scottish Music Industry Association and others as a significant intervention that will boost the Scottish cultural sector internationally.
I call it question 3. Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to ensure freedom of expression is respected at cultural venues.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring that all communities in Scotland feel safe, feel valued and feel respected. Cultural venues are responsible for their own bookings and programming decisions, and neither the Scottish Government nor Creative Scotland have a role in this. We fully support individuals' right to freedom of expression, and we are clear that there is no place for any form of discrimination or prejudice in Scotland.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Recent campaigns by external groups to censor events run by Scottish cultural organisations has made it difficult to secure corporate sponsorship. The National Museum, for example, has suggested that ongoing activism is threatening to cut corporate sponsorship and has created an ever more challenging environment in which to operate. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that such attempts to censor different opinions are unacceptable? And what guarantees will he give to the sector to ensure that potential corporate sponsors will invest in the Scottish culture in the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I very much welcome the question and the tone of the question from Alexander Stewart. It is about corporate sponsorship, but it's also about philanthropy. And if it is the case that particular campaigning organisations, and there are a range, some of which are on subjects where I would have sympathy about the concerns of the day about a particular subject, but by intervening in the way that they do, undermine the potential either for corporate or for philanthropic giving, this is a matter of concern. And I have spoken about this with a range of organisations to try and better understand what can be done to build resilience into the culture sector. I would draw people's attention to an excellent article written by Ian Rankin on this subject. I think there is more that government can do. I do think that there is a role right across the political spectrum for us all to take the opportunity to acknowledge how important it is that corporate sponsorship is protected and in place, because the unintended consequences, to give just but one example, is that the loss of funding for the Edinburgh International Book Festival meant that children of deprived backgrounds might have been deprived of the opportunity to go to that fantastic world-class festival were it not for the Scottish Government who plugged the gap after that funding was withdrawn.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you. And question 6, I call Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide further details of its position on making all future funding for arts organisations conditional on the applicant's commitment to protecting freedom of expression.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as Mr Fraser knows, I've spoken out loudly in favour of freedom of speech. I do so again here today, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to do that. Mr Fraser is also well aware of my defence of the arm's-length relationship between ministers and individual funding decisions for culture and the arts. This really matters for anybody who appreciates the importance of artistic freedom. I acknowledge that this will occasionally test this approach, but I value the principles and proportionality, given that everybody operates subject to the law.
Murdo Fraser.
Well, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, but it is frankly a bit of a cop-out to kick all this over to Creative Scotland, given the Scottish Government have just told another arm's-length organisation, Scottish Enterprise, it needs to revisit its support for defence contractors because they might have products that end up, for example, in the armed forces of Israel. So if the Scottish Government can do that with one arm's-length body, why can't it do it with another? And will the Cabinet Secretary therefore make it very clear to Creative Scotland that its grant should be conditional on the recipients of them upholding free speech, so we don't see any more nonsense like his colleague, the Deputy First Minister, being potentially banned from an arts venue in receipt of taxpayer funds?
Cabinet Secretary.
If they point out to Mr Fraser, I do think there's a tension in standing up and avowing freedom of speech, but at the same time asking for government ministers to micromanage culture. That is not the job of the Cabinet Secretary for Culture, but I'm not walking away from a responsibility of using my voice, of saying that we do want to support a culture of free speech. In relation to the venue that he talks about, I know something about it. It's in my constituency, and I observe that Summerhall management have publicly asserted that Kate Forms is free to attend the venue. But on the generality of the issue, I think it's absolutely right. We want to stand up for freedom of speech, but we also want to protect the arm's-length nature of management in culture and the arts. It is not for government ministers to get involved in micromanaging individual circumstances, but the generality holds true. Freedom of speech matters.
Question number 4, Ros McCall.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it's planning to make any changes to Historic Environment Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
The appointment process for a new chair of Historic Environment Scotland has been underway since May, and an appointment will be announced in due course. As one of our public bodies, HES is expected to regularly review its policies and priorities to ensure it is delivering maximum impacts for public investment, and as part of public service reform work, we've given greater flexibility to HES to allow increased investment into our most nationally significant historic places.
Ros McCall.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, but it was recently revealed that directors at Historic Environment Scotland were awarded pay increases of up to 18%, at the same time as the organisation is facing a £3 million budget shortfall and has admitted to looking for further savings. So does the Cabinet Secretary believe that these increases are acceptable? And does he agree that taxpayers' money would be better used to preserve Scotland's historic sites rather than lining the pockets of senior staff?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I reiterate the point that I made a moment ago, because I think it's very significant, which is that changes are taking place in the management of Historic Environment Scotland, and I'll be happy to update Ros McCall and colleagues in due course. As she'll appreciate, there are matters that I cannot comment on at the present time, but I want to give her confidence that I'm seized of those matters in relation to Historic Environment Scotland. It's really important that the excellent work of HES across Scotland can continue with a new chair, and I look forward to being able to confirm progress on that shortly.
Supplementary, Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thanks to the changes to the framework, Historic Environment Scotland is now able to invest every penny from its commercial income to protect our historic environment for future generations. Is there anything the Cabinet Secretary can say about how this work will enable Historic Environment Scotland to improve visitor experiences and preserve our heritage?
Cabinet Secretary.
Building on the greater financial freedoms provided in the revised framework agreement, Historic Environment Scotland's corporate plan for 2025 to 2028 will see the organisation contribute to the achievement of key national outcomes and deliver for Scotland. By 2028, Historic Environment Scotland aim to have increased direct expenditure on their assets by 15%, increased the number of people that they have trained by 10%, increased their contribution to Scotland's GDP by 10% from £1 billion to £1.1 billion, invested at least £40 million in local communities, and have generated additional funding from non-government sources of at least 20%, from £73.5 million to £87 million.
And supplementary, Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I join the Cabinet Secretary and other members in welcoming the Chair of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association to the gallery. I understand Scottish ministers instructed officials to attend board meetings of Historic Environment Scotland back in May due to governance concerns. Given this, what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give the public and the Chamber that HES will properly and robustly investigate claims that a director of HES hosted an exclusive private dinner at Edinburgh Castle in August?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I thank Neil Bibby for this question, and he knows that I am seized of the matter because I've spoken to him personally about it, as I have with some other members of the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture Committee. I would wish to give him confidence that there are changes taking place in Historic Environment Scotland, and I'll be happy to update him in due course. There will be a new chair of HES announced. I can't say more than that because there are a number of administrative hoops that need to be gone through. I have a very, very high level of confidence in that incoming chair's ability to deal with any issues that need to be looked into, where any follow-up interventions need to be taken, but also encouraging a new chair and anybody else that takes a role in Historic Environment Scotland, that they're doing so in an organisation which has delivered significantly, as I've outlined to Mr Kidd, and I look forward to being able to make an announcement shortly, and I hope it will give Mr Bibby the confidence that it is already given to me.
Question number 5, Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Culture Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding action to support gender equality in the arts and culture sector's workforce.
Cabinet Secretary.
We recognise that women remain underrepresented within the creative industries and are disproportionately in lower-level positions. The sector is known for unpredictable freelance work, making it difficult for women with caring responsibilities, health conditions or disabilities. And while employment law remains reserved to the UK Parliament, the Scottish Government is committed to Fair Work First, including taking action to tackle the gender pay gap across all sectors. We most recently set out actions towards gender equality across all portfolios in the Scottish Government's annual statement on gender policy coherence in June 2025.
Evelyn Tweed.
I thank the Culture Secretary for that response. The Equal Media and Culture Centre for Scotland highlights that women make up the majority of lower-paid and part-time roles in creative industries. Higher-paid decision-making and leadership roles are more likely to be filled by men. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to tackle this occupational segregation.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think it's a very important question and an important follow-up, and I wish to give Evelyn Tweed confidence that the work that is being conducted in government together with the sector is looking at all of these challenges. We want to make sure that people of all backgrounds, especially the majority of people in Scotland who are women, to have the fair crack of the whip in terms of the culture and arts sector and the leadership positions in it. I can point to a great many women who run some of our most important cultural institutions, and I would wish there to be many more.
And supplementary, Pam Coulson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to declare my interest as one of the proud authors of the Women Who Wouldn't Wished book. Presiding Officer, this Government likes to bang on about its commitment to gender equality. However, Women Who Wouldn't Wished, a book which included essays from diverse women, including myself, was temporarily removed from the National Library of Scotland during the busiest time of the Fringe due to staff pressure. So, yes or no answer, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that banning books from feminist authors sends the wrong message to women who wish to work in the arts and culture sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, Presiding Officer, I've been asked a follow-up question about the approach of the Scottish Government to tackle occupational segregation, and
Cabinet Secretary, could you resume your seat for a second? I did note your look towards me during the supplementary question. The question on the Business Bulletin is to ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Culture Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding action to support gender equality in the arts and culture sector's workforce. And I think that the Cabinet Secretary could perhaps find a way to, with that in mind, respond to the member's question.
Answer that question in reply to Evelyn Tweed in her question. I'd be happy to write to the member about the issue she raises, but I would echo the points that I was making. I would echo the points that I was making to her front bench spokesman on the issue that it is.
Ms Gozo, please allow the Cabinet Secretary to respond. Thank you.
It's not the place of a Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary to micromanage the culture sector, which is why we have arm's-length relations with our funding organisations and our cultural organisations. The point that she has made is on the record, as is my commitment to freedom of speech.
Thank you. We move on to question number 7. Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the Culture Secretary last met with Creative Scotland to discuss the future of Cumbernauld Theatre in light of reported concerns about its funding.
Cabinet Secretary.
I meet quarterly with the Chair and Chief Executive of Creative Scotland. We have discussed in depth the successful delivery of the multi-year funding programme, including how Creative Scotland is supporting organisations such as Cumbernauld Theatre. I also met the Chair of the Cumbernauld Theatre on the 26th of March, where we discussed the steps they were taking following their unsuccessful application for multi-year funding. The Chair of Cumbernauld Theatre wrote to me on the 10th of September, highlighting their current challenges, and I have now replied offering to meet to discuss their situation.
Mark Griffin.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Now, given the importance of Cumbernauld Theatre as a cultural heart of Cumbernauld now for over 60 years and the excellent work being done by the new leadership team, can I ask, beyond those meetings, what firm action the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that the theatre is able to continue to serve the people of Cumbernauld and wider Lanarkshire following the decision by Creative Scotland to remove funding?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm very well aware of the issues relating to Cumbernauld Theatre, given the past meetings that I've had, the impending meetings that are taking place, but also the excellent representation it has had from my Cumbernauld and Kilsyth SNP MSP colleague, Jamie Hepburn. I look forward to meeting Cumbernauld Theatre shortly to better understand their funding concerns and plans to secure funding, given the decision by Creative Scotland on multi-annual year funding. Mr Griffin, I'm sure, would be interested to know that it has been a subject of conversation between myself, the civil servants who are responsible in this policy area, and I will be taking up directly with both Cumbernauld Theatre and Creative Scotland.
And at question number 8, I call Michelle Thompson.
To ask the Scottish Government on what basis it will assess the contribution of Scotland's performing arts organisations in advance of the next budget.
Cabinet Secretary.
Government has a proud tradition of supporting our performing arts organisations, and we prepare for the next budget. We will assess their contribution through cultural, educational, economic and international lenses. Our national performing companies, now in their 19th year of direct funding, deliver against clear objectives covering excellence, reach, leadership and collaboration. And I recently met all 5 NPCs and was inspired by their work to ensure Scotland is celebrated globally as a creative nation. This evidence will guide our investment decisions to sustain a vibrant, inclusive cultural sector.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, and I completely agree about the calibre of our national performing companies. It is indeed excellent. However, I'm quite aware that one of the drivers of our Finance Committee is to assess fiscal sustainability, and that must also surely be a measure that should be applied to our national performing arts organisations. I would even go as far as to consider the GVA contribution of each of them, and if so, if the Cabinet Secretary agrees with that, because I was very struck by the very positive evidence from Alistair Mackey of the RSNO in last week's Culture Committee, would he see a role for the Finance Committee in focusing on fiscal sustainability specifically?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I confirm to Michelle Thompson, I have found it very, very helpful, as I'm sure have members of the Chamber from all parties, to have an understanding of the GVA impact on certain parts of the cultural sector. So we had a recent report published in relation to the screen sector that pointed out that we are heading towards an industry worth over £1 billion by 2030, which is a remarkable success. In assessing applications to its multi-year funding programme, Creative Scotland used 6 criteria. They were quality and ambition, engagement, equalities, diversity and inclusion, environmental sustainability, fair work and international for those organisations whose proposals involved international activity. In addition, assessment was made of the financial health of applicant organisations. Spending decisions are scrutinised by parliamentary committees in line with their own processes and chosen areas of focus, but I know a number of cultural organisations are in the process of commissioning economic impact assessments and their GVA contribution to the Scottish economy, and I would encourage those that haven't yet made a decision in that area to follow the advice of Michelle Thompson on this question.
Thank you. And I squeeze in a brief supplementary. Stephen Kerr.
Some of our national companies have been truly entrepreneurial. The RSNO is a very good example. They've been producing soundtracks for major Hollywood productions, and that's exactly the kind of financial responsibility we would want to see right across the sector. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what encouragement he will give to other national companies to follow that example, and will he commit that those who do show such enterprise, like the RSNO, will not be penalised when it comes to the allocation of public money that they still need to thrive?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, firstly, on praising for the RSNO, I join Mr Kerr, absolutely right. Not only are they doing what they're doing in terms of film soundtracks, they're also doing it for gaming soundtracks. And it's a huge business, and to know how many of these world-class productions, be they for the screen or for gamers, it really is very impressive. I'd like to give him confidence, given our national performing companies work really, really closely with one another. They are very keen to emulate one another with the enterprise attitude that he encourages us to take. He's also encouraged us to make sure that the money is in place. I am happy to say to him that I am very sympathetic to that. It's only a disappointment Mr Kerr didn't vote for that in the budget.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes portfolio questions on Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. There will be a very short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Allow front bench teams to quickly, please, change position. Thank you. Thank you. The next portfolio is Justice and Home Affairs. And at question number 1, I call Annie Wells.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what measures it's taken to address gang-related violence.
Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, partners on the Serious Organised Crime Task Force continue to use every means at their disposal to disrupt serious organised crime, including gang-related violence. In addition, the Scottish Crime Campus enhances collaboration between key partner organisations in disrupting serious organised crime and terrorism. The public should be reassured that Police Scotland continues to work with partners to disrupt such criminal activity, and these criminals show a complete disregard for the safety of the public, and it is incumbent on us all that they are stopped and held to account. And I would encourage anyone with relevant information to report it to Police Scotland or anonymously through Crime Stoppers.
Annie Wells.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but given that Glasgow has historically experienced some of the highest levels of gang-related violence in Scotland, what additional targeted measures are being introduced in the city to address this issue and to support prevention and diversion programmes for young people at risk of gang involvement?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit is working with partners to deliver street guardians, and this is similar to the street pastors model being used to deploy youth workers and volunteers during early evening economy hours within Glasgow city centre. Workers undertake a capable guardianship role and have early intervention with young people to prevent violence from happening. This work includes Common Ground, which is a collective of partners who have secured a premise outside Central train station in Glasgow to utilise as a youth hub and support the work of street pastors through the provision of a safe space for young people and targeted engagement. This, of course, is underpinned by our broader programme of work, and if the member wishes more detail, I would be delighted to write to her.
Supplementary, Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The importance of reaching our young folk at risk of joining gangs at an early age cannot be underestimated. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what the Scottish Government is currently doing to support those organisations who work to help and support those most at risk of becoming involved in crime?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I hope to reassure members that the Scottish Government continues to tackle youth violence in all its form, and that is through education programmes, effective consequences for offences, appropriate police powers and sustained school and community engagement with young people. And this is backed by an investment of more than £6 million to implement the violence prevention framework, which includes actions to address the carrying of weapons in and around schools. And of course the big focus of the Cashback for Communities programme, which is having additional investment, is indeed to really bear down into preventative work.
Question number 2, Alexander Burnett.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that 183 police stations need repairs, 177 contain asbestos and 4 contain reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the management of the Police Scotland estate, including assessment of the condition of buildings and statutory and general health and safety at work requirements, are an operational matter for the Chief Constable under the oversight of the Scottish Police Authority. We support Police Scotland's commitment to providing a safe environment for officers, staff and the public. In 2025-26, we increased capital funding to £70 million for investment in the estate, technology, fleet and body-worn video, and this will support Police Scotland to commence delivery of its estate's master plan, which will deliver a modern, fit-for-purpose estate that serves the needs of the workforce and our communities.
Alexander Burnett.
I'm afraid the Cabinet Secretary is not going to get away with the fact that her government is putting officers and staff at risk. I have a Freedom of Information request which shows that Police Scotland spent over £230,000 on just managing, not even removing asbestos in police stations over the last 3 years. And the North East has the highest number of buildings with asbestos, with 25 riddled with it. Now, police officers are being forced to work in buildings which are not just substandard, but dangerous, as if being a police officer in Scotland is not dangerous enough. So will the Cabinet Secretary commit to properly funding Police Scotland and ensure that its buildings are fit for purpose and all asbestos is removed where it is safe to do so?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it's all very well for the member to argue for additional funding for Police Scotland after the budget has passed, because I do not recall either him or any member of his party coming to this chamber or during budget negotiations advocating for additional resources for Police Scotland. In fact, I think I may have been the only MSP that actively advocated for additional resources for Police Scotland. And indeed, I am pleased that due to Scottish Government commitments that we have provided almost £90
Cabinet
million.
Secretary, please resume your seat a second. I will not have this barracking from secondary positions. Please show courtesy and respect and listen to the Cabinet Secretary's response. Thank you very much indeed. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is a matter of public record that this Government will provide almost £90 million in additional funding compared to the previous financial year, and that we have increased capital to £70 million. I should remind colleagues that under the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012, responsibility for the control and management of asbestos in Scottish police stations rests with Police Scotland as the duty holder. But I, of course, discuss a range of matters with the Chief Constable and Police Scotland in and around their requirements for capital.
And supplementary, Katie Clark.
Greenock Police Station has not been properly maintained for many years and is earmarked for closure. Police Scotland's estate master plan also noted that Greenock needs a new station. Can the Cabinet Secretary give an update on the progress to delivering a new station for Greenock and confirm it will have a custody suite?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it is important that Police Scotland consider very carefully the location, in particular of custody suites, and I know that that is a matter that they have and continue to give serious consideration to. As I said in my earlier answer, the specific responsibilities in and around police stations rest at an operational level with the Chief Constable and Police Scotland, but I would be happy, after consulting with Police Scotland, to provide an update to Ms Clark.
Question number 3, Bob Doris.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support is available to women preparing for release from prison.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government provides funding to local authorities and third sector organisations to support women to prepare for release. We provide over £5 million a year to Upside, the National Voluntary Through Care Service, to support people leaving short-term sentences and periods of remand. This one-to-one support includes help to address issues such as access to housing, healthcare and social security payments, as well as longer-term support to help rebuild their lives and reintegrate into their communities. For women leaving long-term sentences, we centrally fund local authorities to provide statutory support through Justice Social Work.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The opportunity to develop skills needed for adjusting to life outside of prison is hugely important in delivering better outcomes. This is something the Lilly Centre in my constituency works very hard to deliver. Will the Cabinet Secretary join me in commending the efforts of the team at the Lilly Centre, and does she agree with me that investing in rehabilitation is crucial in tackling women reoffending?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely, Presiding Officer. The Lilly Centre in Mr Doris's constituency and the Bella Centre in Dundee represent a real step change in the rehabilitation of women in custody. As you'd expect, I have visited both these centres, help women develop key life skills and a much greater degree of independence, and I commend the work of SPS and partners to help to give women in custody the best possible chance of a successful return to the community. And I also note that His Majesty Inspector of Prisons commended SPS's progress towards the vision for women in custody and identified a number of good practices in the report last year, including work on developing women's entrepreneurial skills.
A supplementary, Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The numbers speak for themselves that we're not doing enough. Reconviction rates for women being discharged from custody have increased from 39% for the 2020-21 cohort to 45% for the 21-22 cohort, which is higher than the rate for men. There was a documentary in March about HMP Stirling where a female inmate said, "I don't want to be out, it's just safer in here." So how does the Government explain the huge increase in reconviction rates for women, and what are they doing to ensure women are safe when they leave prison?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it is important to recognise that the proportion of females in custody is disproportionately, significantly so, smaller than that for men. The member is correct to point to the greater vulnerability and the complexity of needs amongst many of women in our care, and that's why the investment that we have made in the new HMP Stirling, as well as the Bella Centre and Lilias Centre, are so important. But the crux of her question points to the fact that short-term custodial sentences are way less effective for rehabilitating both women and men, and that is why we need to all resolve to do more in terms of alternative to remand and alternatives to custody. Community payback orders have a great flexibility to provide tailor-made support for women and others.
Question number 4, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of reports of concerns being raised in communities across Highlands and Islands in relation to land auctions involving potentially misleading advertising, what action it will take to ensure that people who believe they have been affected by such practices have recourse under Scots law, including access to legal representation and support.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Any purchaser intending to buy property at an auction house should ensure that they have all the necessary information. Buyers can request certain information from the selling agent or undertake their own searches. Any concerns about auction houses not providing a full disclosure of the state of land or property should be reported to the local Trading Standards Office. Anyone who believes that they have been subjected to misleading advertising practices should contact Advice Direct Scotland to discuss their concerns. The Scottish Legal Aid Board provides information on nearest solicitors who offer help through legal aid or other advice providers.
Liam MacArthur.
Minister, for that response. Over the past year, misleading ads for land sales in Orkney and across the Highlands and Islands have caused concerns, both for buyers but also for the communities affected. I welcome steps taken by operators like Rightmove to review their listings and reinforce to sellers that any information advertised must be wholly accurate. As I've seen, however, unscrupulous sellers move on to find other avenues to exploit. Buyers must have confidence their rights will be protected, and communities deserve better than the misleading marketing of land for housing and development. So, will the Scottish Government take steps to raise public awareness of these scams, and will the Minister explore, perhaps with UK counterparts, ways to close existing loopholes and reinforce consumer protections?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yes, I note the concerns that the member has raised and happy to look into it on behalf of the member. I do note that previously the member has raised if it would be possible perhaps to have an amendment in the Land Reform Bill, and I do understand that the Cabinet Secretary in charge of the bill would be happy to discuss this further with the member to identify concerns and appropriate means of dealing with this issue.
Question number 5, Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what actions it is taking to address the illegal use of off-road bikes, e-bikes and e-scooters.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government provides Police Scotland and its partners in dealing with misuse of vehicles. I met with a number of MSPs in May to discuss their concerns with my colleague Minister Fairley, and action has since involved development of a campaign involving Crime Stoppers and Fearless, which got close to 7 million impressions. Enforcement is a matter for Police Scotland, and local policing teams are best placed to identify misuse and work to prevent future incidents. We have increased police funding to a record £1.62 billion this year to support the work that they do. Additionally, I understand that Police Scotland is undertaking a range of initiatives, including working with delivery companies, which I know was an issue that the member has raised with me previously. We will continue to engage with the UK Government, which has reserved powers relating to off-road vehicles, including vehicle licensing.
Stuart for that response and acknowledge that I was at that meeting on the 29th of May. But antisocial behaviour is up 5% in the past year. E-bikes, e-scooters, they're playing a huge role in encouraging that. Trail bikes, souped-up e-bikes and e-scooters are tearing around the streets, often in a very dangerous manner, and are repeatedly being used to facilitate home break-ins, shoplifting and car thefts. My constituents are fed up. Meanwhile, the police are powerless. They don't give chase and they lack the required resources to stop them. If the bikes are seized, they are more often than not handed back. Minister, enough is enough. Do you not agree that it's time we got tough on this sort of crime and provide the police with the real resources to tackle it?
Always to the Chair, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am aware that the member feels passionately, and I'm aware of the issues that are happening throughout Scotland. I do disagree that the Police Scotland are not doing anything. As I said, there is underlying work that has been going on for several months now, and I know they are keeping a review on their approach to illegal use of e-bikes and e-scooters. This complements the wider efforts to engage with communities and partners to prevent and tackle this issue, and I know through Glasgow's division collaboration with hospitals and also with food delivery companies. I will, of course, keep members informed as further information becomes available, but I would also be happy to facilitate discussions with Police Scotland where helpful.
And brief supplementary, Paul McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In recognising that some powers such as vehicle licensing are reserved to UK Government, can the Minister provide an update on the engagement with UK Government in tackling antisocial behaviour, including vehicles?
Minister.
We continue to engage with the UK Government on reserved matters, including vehicle use, including vehicle licensing. While the UK Government has so far not responded positively to our proposal to extend the safety benefits of vehicle licensing to off-road vehicles, there are some encouraging developments. For example, the Product Regulation and Metrology Act will provide powers to take action against online marketplaces selling illegally modified vehicles. And we remain committed to working constructively with the UK Government, recognising that this is a shared challenge, and we continue to support enforcement of all existing regulations through our record levels of funding to the police.
Question number 6, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what work has been undertaken to improve the rehabilitation of people who are subject to short prison sentences.
Cabinet Secretary.
Officer, as I said earlier to Mr Doris, the Upside service is aimed at supporting all individuals leaving custody after a short prison sentence or periods of remand. Upside is a service made of 8 experienced third sector organisations. All individuals leaving prison are eligible for support on release to help them resettle into the community and ensuring those leaving custody have their basic needs met on release, and that's absolutely critical for a safe transition back to the community. We are also taking forward work to improve support available to people leaving prison, including the development of a national standards for through care as introduced in the Bail and Release from Custody Act.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank the Minister for her response. I visited Barlinnie Prison last month, and the staff there were quite clear that short prison sentences are not having the benefits and rehabilitation that they would like to see, and that does need to be improvement in this area. One case was cited of a young man who had been released after a shorter sentence and was back in prison because he didn't know how to pay rent to his landlord, and then was so humiliated by it that he ran away and then ended up back on drugs and in a fight. So clearly that case was a failure, and it's resulted in a bad outcome for that person and for society. Can the Minister undertake to review the efficacy of short sentencing in each case where this doesn't work? We can address why it hasn't worked and deal with that.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we await the independent deliberations from the Sentencing and Penal Commission, and there are, as the member has articulated, a raft of evidence, both at an individual level and an empirical evidence, that speaks to the inefficiency of short-term sentences. We understand that on a case-by-case basis they are at times necessary, but the facts are that they are far less effective in setting folk on the right path in comparison to an alternative to custody. So our focus has to be on building up alternative to custodies, and of course community sentencing is also on the increase. In terms of the individual issue that he raises in relation to an individual, I would like to highlight that the support provided by Upside begins in custody up to 12 weeks prior to release where that's possible, and it's also underpinned by over £5 million of funding per annum, and that was an increase of nearly £2 million.
Supplementary, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Government released 789 prisoners early from their short sentences last summer and early this year in an attempt to ease overcrowding and without consideration of their individual rehabilitation journeys. Now, 1 in 10 of that first tranche were back behind bars within weeks, so it begs a question. What analysis of each prisoner's stage of rehabilitation did the Government do before these releases to ensure that the rehabilitation was not being terminated early?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, Presiding Officer, the member is referring to the early emergency release that commenced, and what that demonstrated that there was a return to custody rate of 12 to 13%, which is way lower than the reconviction rate for those who are released in general from short-term custodial sentences, and it is imperative to address issues with short-term sentences in the longer run. But if I can also point the member to, in terms of the specifics of that scheme, there was extensive planning and preparation to implement that scheme that involved third sector and statutory organisations. So good planning for any release, whether it's emergency or otherwise, is the backbone of reducing that return rate. And it's the preparation for release, whether it's under standard or different arrangements. And I'd also just quickly highlight that there was also the Governor's veto, as well as statutory exclusions from that scheme.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Question number 7, Michael Chapman.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on any discussions it has had with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service about role expansion for firefighters.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, modernisation of the Scottish Fire Rescue Service, including broadening the role of firefighters, remains an ambition for this government. I recognise there is potential for firefighters to do more to protect communities through a broadened role, and I'm aware of the outline agreement between SFRS and the Fire Brigades Union that is dependent on additional funding. Although the proposal so far has been unaffordable, I regularly meet with the SFRS Chair and Chief Officer and will continue to work closely with them in considering future budgets in the context of delivering on public sector reform.
Michael Chapman.
2 years ago, the FBU published Firestorm, a report into the future of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, which said clearly of role expansion, firefighters are willing to take on additional responsibilities, like emergency medical response and terrorist activity response. And it could be transformational for our emergency services, saving money and time elsewhere, and benefiting other public services. But it has to be supported with proper training and sustained investment. There are already pressures on existing training provision. There are significant concerns about job security, staffing levels and capacity, and response times. How can firefighters and the communities they keep safe have confidence that the necessary funding, training and equipment will be providing for existing services and any future role expansion?
Sorry, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As I said in my opening comments, it is an ambition for the Government to broaden the role of firefighters. The Scottish Government is currently conducting a spending review which will set indicative budgets for the next 3 years for resource and also 4 years for capital. And in the context of the spending review, I know that the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs met with the SFRS Chair and Chief Officer, and the emergency medical response element of the broad role was discussed. Since 2017 to 18, there have been substantial year-on-year increases in funding to support SFRS, and the current annual budget is over £97 million higher than the equivalent budget in 2017 to 18.
Brief supplementary, Jackie Bailey.
The downgrading of 24/7 cover at Helensburgh Fire Station to an on-call evening and weekend system relies on the recruitment of retained firefighters. Does the Minister understand that there are not enough retained firefighters to cover the existing shifts at fire stations in Helensburgh and Lomond, and does she therefore believe that the new proposals to rely on this model represent an increased risk to my local community?
Minister.
Firstly, I need to say to Jackie Bailey, as I said in the last time we were in the chamber discussing this, no decisions on the consultation have been made yet. I know the consultation for the service delivery review closed on the 16th of September. The emergencies that SFRS responds to have changed significantly over the years. An example, dwelling fires have reduced by over 20% in 2013. So I know, and I have a commitment from the SFRS, that they will now, an independent review will go into the consultation before any decision is made, and when any decision is made, it will be rolled out over a period of 5 years.
And brief supplementary, Rachel Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, I, alongside thousands of local residents, responded to the consultation on the future of Hoyk Fire Station to express our concerns that these proposals would undoubtedly put people at risk, as Jackie Bailey says. These presentations are due to be put in front of SFRS Board for final decision mid-December 2025. Can the Minister confirm that any decision regarding the future of Hoyk Fire Station will not go against the clear wishes of the community?
Minister.
Thank you. As I said, no decisions have been made regarding that. I am not going to comment on, I know there were 23 options in the consultation, and I will not be commenting on individual points of that consultation, but I do appreciate and I do trust that the SFRS will follow the correct procedure in this consultation.
And I can squeeze in question 8 if I get brief questions and answers to match. Claire Baker.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how it is working with authorities in Mid-Scotland and Fife to address antisocial behaviour.
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I recognise the impact of antisocial behaviour can have on local communities in all areas of Scotland. That is why we have increased police funding to a record £1.62 billion this year, and funding to local governments have increased in real terms by 5.5%. Local authorities and Police Scotland have a range of options and powers available for preventing and tackling antisocial behaviour, taking local needs into account. Moreover, since 2008, our Cashback for Communities programme has provided £154 million to support young people who are most at risk of being involved in violence, antisocial behaviour and crime, and the most recent Cashback bidding round has just closed.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. Fife Council had to shell out a repair bill of close to £900,000 for 2,856 incidents of vandalism to public buildings and parks between 2022 and 2024. And last year, a new play park in Leavenmouth had to close less than 6 months later after being vandalised, with a repair bill to the council of over thousands. So what is the Scottish Government doing to better support local authorities and police and ensure they have adequate resources not only to meet these bills resulting from these incidents, but also to actively reduce them?
Minister, briefly.
Thank you. I recognise the impact of this behaviour has on communities and on local authorities as well. We will continue to support local authorities and the police to work in multi-agency partnerships and with communities and businesses to prevent and to tackle antisocial behaviour. It is a complex issue. We know this is brought up time and time again, but the Scottish Government are committed to tackling this type of antisocial behaviour.
And very brief supplementary, Willie Rennie.
I want the Minister to know that even in relatively peaceful North East Fife, antisocial behaviour affects almost every single community. And I want the Minister to take that back in our budget discussions about resources for councils, for housing associations and for the police, because people are at their wits' end with some of this behaviour.
Minister.
Thank you. I am, and I will take that comments on board with my discussions, but I am also aware of some really good practice in Fife and Mid Scotland, such as increased patrols in Stirling city centre, and also good practice in responding to antisocial behaviour involving retailers in Stirling, which was also highlighted at the Independent Working Group on Antisocial Behaviour. I have visited that social enterprise in Stirling, and they do incredible work. So I think it is a place which we could take guidance from to how we tackle antisocial behaviour.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes portfolio questions on Justice and Home Affairs. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.
Okay, the next item of business is a statement by Kate Forbes on Alexander Dennis Limited. The Deputy First Minister will take questions at the end of her statement. Therefore, there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Kate Forbes, Deputy First Minister, up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am absolutely delighted to be back in the Chamber to update members on the landmark announcement that Alexander Dennis delivered to its workforce in Larbert on Monday. The First Minister was delighted to join Alexander Dennis's workforce and trade union representatives as they received the welcome news that the threat of redundancy had been lifted and the company has decided to continue bus manufacturing in Scotland. The First Minister was also pleased to announce £4 million of Scottish Government funding towards a furlough scheme for Alexander Dennis's manufacturing staff. That's the first time that any Scottish Government has supported a company-administered furlough scheme. It's an innovative and exceptional intervention to support hundreds of jobs within Alexander Dennis and will act as a bridge to a sustainable future for the company in Scotland as orders pick up again. This outcome has been hard-won, requiring the trust, dedication and goodwill of a range of partners, including the management of Alexander Dennis, the workers, trade unions and our enterprise agencies. Together, through close collaboration, we have come a long way in a very short period of time. When I made my last statement to the Chamber on Alexander Dennis in June, the future was unquestionably uncertain. And I know that this was having a real impact on the workforce in Larbert and Falkirk and the wider community. At that point, the company had just made public a new strategy for its UK manufacturing operations designed to consolidate all bus manufacturing into a single site at Scarborough in Yorkshire. If enacted, production at Falkirk would have been discontinued and the site closed, whilst production at Larbert would have been suspended on the completion of current contracts. Around the same time, the company commenced a statutory workforce consultation that placed up to 400 roles at risk of redundancy. Without a substantive and agile response, Scotland would have been facing the prospect of losing our bus manufacturing capacity for good. That would have ended over a century of automotive excellence in central Scotland and dealt a hammer blow to the affected workers, their families and the surrounding communities. But the economic consequences would not have stopped there, as members reminded me during that statement. Alexander Dennis estimates that for every direct job in bus manufacturing, there is a multiplier of 3 to 4 jobs in the wider supply chain and support services. The commitment of this government was to leave no stone unturned to find practical solutions. We said we wouldn't posture or play politics with the situation and would explore every avenue to avoid redundancies, and we have done just that. Since June, ministers across this government have engaged extensively with Alexander Dennis and their Canadian parent company, NFI Group, to understand the core issues and explore all possible avenues of support. We heard about the challenges posed by increasing international competition and the need for a clear UK bus demand pipeline. We gained an appreciation of the huge scale of future demand for zero-emission buses from public transport operators across the UK as they increasingly make the switch from diesel-powered to electric vehicles. Last year, in 2024, only 7.4% of all buses in England were zero emissions. In Scotland, the adoption of zero-emission buses has been much faster, but still a great many of the buses on our roads today will have to be replaced over the next decade to meet our climate goals. A just transition to net zero requires that we retain the industrial capacity and the skills needed to fulfil that demand and to build those zero-emission buses right here in Scotland. Despite the present temporary lull in activity, Alexander Dennis is increasingly confident about their order book, but they needed a bridge to the future. And the Scottish Government has offered that with the furlough support we have made available. The furlough scheme, which will operate for up to 26 weeks, is intended to be the bridge needed to a sustainable future for Alexander Dennis. If all the conditions of the furlough grant are met, including initial evidence of contracted orders, then Alexander Dennis will be entitled to recover from the Scottish Government up to 80% of the basic wage costs of its manufacturing staff in Scotland. The terms of our scheme have parallels with the UK Government's Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, with a maximum claim of £2,500 per employee per month, equivalent to a gross annual salary of £30,000. The company will be responsible for the payment of wages above the £2,500 per month threshold and for all employers' national insurance and pension contributions. Importantly, the government support scheme extends only to those employees of Alexander Dennis whose roles are linked directly to bus manufacturing. The furlough support scheme is also time-limited to a maximum period of 26 weeks, and the total costs will not exceed £4.1 million. If Alexander Dennis chooses to take employees off furlough for periods of training to conduct work or during pre-arranged factory shutdowns, such as the festive holidays, all costs for these periods will be borne by the company. So our furlough grant is a time-limited and proportionate intervention that protects the industrial talent base that we have, whilst limiting the burden on taxpayers. Furlough, of course, is not a standalone intervention. During that period of furlough, training and other productivity-enhancing assistance will continue to be offered by Scottish Enterprise. Scottish Enterprise has a strong 10-year-plus strategic partnership with the business, and their R&D and operational support will help the company to meet market challenges through investment and support the sites to exit furlough with improved performance. I have addressed the contributions of Alexander Dennis, the Government and Scottish Enterprise. I now want to acknowledge the workforce and the vital role that their representatives in the trade unions, Unite and GMB, have played in the announcements that we and the company have been able to make this week. For the past few months, these have been extremely worrying times for all who work proudly for Alexander Dennis, for their families and for the local communities of Larbert and Falkirk. In spite of those challenges, the workforce has demonstrated enormous resilience and collaborated with the company on an agreement that modernises operational working practices. That the shop floor has approved these changes through an overwhelmingly positive ballot last week is a testament to their commitment to the future of Alexander Dennis. I've engaged with both Unite and GMB representatives regularly over the past few months. I think they may be sick of the sight of my face. I did so again yesterday. And throughout it all, I have been so impressed by their determination to support their members, their desire to find solutions and their openness to change. In conclusion, I hope that the announcements made this week will bring comfort to the workers at Alexander Dennis, and they can look forward with confidence yet again. It's essential that we protect the skilled manufacturing capacity we need to build our transition to a green industrial economy. With our innovative furlough support, this Government has again demonstrated a willingness to step in to support Scottish workers and to get behind Scottish manufacturing. There's a lot more to do, Presiding Officer. With the Parliament's permission, I imagine this may not be my last comment in the Chamber on this matter. There are still some challenges ahead, and I have been assured that Alexander Dennis is working hard to secure orders in national and international markets, and their confidence in the order book is increasing. As a result of a great collaboration between the company, the workforce and the government, a bridge to a sustainable future for Alexander Dennis is now in place. Thank you.
Thank you. The Deputy First Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in their statement and tend to allow around 20 minutes, after which we will then have to move on to the next item of business. I'd be grateful for members wishing to ask a question who haven't already done so to press the request to speak buttons. And I call first Stephen Kerr.
First of all, let me thank the Deputy First Minister for advance sight of her statement, and I welcome the Scottish Government's £4 million support package, which will provide some short-term relief for the workforce at Alexander Dennis in Larbert and Falkirk. And that is a positive step, but it does not address the fundamental issue. This is not simply about bridging a few months, it's about the long-term sustainable future of bus manufacturing in Scotland. And Alexander Dennis have been crystal clear with all of us and with the UK and Scottish governments. It doesn't seek favours, but it only seeks the chance to compete fairly. At present, procurement rules tilt the field against domestic producers, while heavily subsidised imports, particularly from China, undercut Scottish manufacturers and win contracts that should sustain our own industry and jobs. That cannot continue. If we are serious about jobs, skills and industrial resilience, procurement reform must now be a priority. So, will the Deputy First Minister commit today to working with the UK Government and pressing the UK Government for a joint approach to reform that ensures this problem does not persist in the future, because the future viability of companies like Alexander Dennis depends on it? And will she publish clear proposals with timelines and firm commitments to deliver the level playing field our manufacturers need to compete and win the orders that will secure their future?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I thank the member both for the tone and the substance of his question. Let me say a few remarks, because he is absolutely right that the furlough is merely a means to an end, the end being the orders and the order book. Now, we've set out that the furlough scheme can only be drawn down when there is evidence of Alexander Dennis receiving orders, and I will not be able to go into any detail here on an order book, because it is so commercially sensitive, and that may refer to why I said I would be happy to come back and talk further. But they are increasingly confident about the short-term opportunities for orders. But he's right in saying that what we need going beyond that is a long-term pipeline of orders. And the two answers to that are, first of all, that we anticipate, through the UK Government in particular, evidence of either mayoral authorities, local government and the UK Government itself procuring more buses over the medium to long term. Now, that was always going to be too long for Alexander Dennis to wait, which is why the Scottish Government has stepped in to provide support in the short term. But he also asked about the regulatory changes, because in the first press release that Alexander issued, they specifically referenced that unfair position as they perceived it. So the short answer is yes, because we haven't seen any progress yet on those regulatory changes that Alexander Dennis want to see. And we are continuing to engage with the UK Government on those points. It's partly to do with subsidy control legislation. There's a lot of technical details behind it, and I'd be more than happy to pick up with the member or any other members on the detail that needs to be changed. But it is within the gift of the UK Government to make those regulatory changes.
Daniel Johnson.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for advance sight of her statement. These have been incredibly difficult times for the workforce in Alexander Dennis, so this is undoubtedly a welcome intervention that provides breathing space for the firm to repair its order book, but that surely is what needs to be the focus now, which is why Scottish Labour have been working to reach out to colleagues, especially mayors, to see what can be done to win orders. So can I ask, firstly, the Deputy First Minister, what efforts is the Scottish Government making to secure orders, and what is her expectation? But this also undoubtedly raises questions about industrial strategy. These efforts are welcome, but surely that should be put in up front. So despite £30 million worth of funding over 10 years from Scottish Enterprise and £40 million from the last round of ScotZeb funding, only 44 bus orders were obtained by Alexander Dennis. Now, if ScotZeb 2 is being reopened, what lessons have been learned and what will be put right so that we actually win orders for Alexander Dennis through future funding rounds from the Scottish Government?
Deputy First Minister.
So let me just say up front, and this will be a common refrain this afternoon, I am not going to go into detail about orders because of the commercial sensitivity. So I'll just say that up front in response to every answer. So he asked about efforts to secure orders, and I will not go into detail on that. But he also asks about what engagement we've had with the UK Government. Now, there was obviously a lot of noise when this announcement was first made back in June, and promises made by the UK Government to work on a pipeline. We await details of that pipeline. I think we've been assured that it will be forthcoming in autumn. We were always aware that that's medium to long term, so it is definitely important, but it would be too late for Alexander Dennis in that regard. So I'm more than happy to continue to engage with the member on the question of orders, but in the short term it's a bridge that's required, and that's what we've secured.
Thank you. There's a lot of members wishing to ask questions, so the usual plea for brevity in those questions and, as far as possible, with the responses. I call first Michael Matheson, to be followed by Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I offer my thanks to the Deputy First Minister for a very considerable level of engagement in this issue over the course of the summer with the trade union and with the company and with myself directly. On Monday, the company were very clear that in order to create a sustainable pathway for the company, the issue of procurement reform is necessary. And when I met with the trade unions, both Unite and the GMB at the factory on Monday, they were very clear on the need for the Subsidy Control Act to be reformed in order to create a pathway for that procurement reform. It was introduced by the last Conservative government, and it's now in the hands of the Labour government in Westminster. What commitment have the UK Government given to the Scottish Government that they will address the issues of concern within the Subsidy Control Act to ensure that we don't find ourselves in this situation again with Alexander Dennis?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I thank Michael Matheson immensely for his staunch representation of his local constituents in this regard and for the constructive way he has engaged. He asks about the route to reform, and I remain of the view that we do need to see regulatory reform alongside medium to long-term pipeline of bus orders. In terms of the Subsidy Control Act, we continue to engage with the UK Government on subsidy control legislation. Section 17 of the Subsidy Control Act prohibits subsidies being given which are contingent on using domestic over imported goods or services. That's often referred to as local content subsidies. That prohibition is founded in long-standing WTO law and also implements our commitments in the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So he'll understand, therefore, that there are limits within which the Scottish Government needs to operate, and we do need to see the UK Government making any changes that are required. The same would go for procurement law as well.
Thank you. We've got 11 members wanting in and just under 12 minutes. I call Murdo Fraser, to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given Alexander Dennis was investing in Scarborough to consolidate manufacturing on that site in order to improve efficiency, what can the Scottish Government do to improve the long-term viability of the Scottish sites? Because while the prospect of new contracts is extremely welcome, it's not a full solution if the parent company NFI believe those contracts could be more efficiently and effectively delivered in Scarborough.
First Minister.
Well, in terms of the long-term viability of those sites, Scottish Enterprise are actively working with the company, and that will be part of the overall package of support to ensure that there is investment in the Scottish site so that it can deliver on any orders that are forthcoming.
Willie Coffey, to be followed by Richard Leonard.
Officer, we met the senior management team from Alexander Dennis at our Economy Committee not so long ago, and I was hugely impressed with their commitment to find a solution to save the business and save the jobs in Scotland. Does the Deputy First Minister share that view, and is she confident that going forward, Alexander Dennis is in safe hands with good management and fantastic staff?
Deputy First Minister.
I've been hugely inspired by both the management and their level of commitment and also the workforce representation. Having worked on a number of cases where there are redundancies being threatened or the prospect of closure, so much of it hangs on whether or not a company and its management and unions are willing to cooperate collaboratively. And in this case, it's been very impressive to see them do that.
Richard Lynner, to be followed by Kevin Stewart.
Can I remind members of my register of interest? Can I ask the Deputy First Minister if the Government will give environmental performance, social value and Scottish economic impact much greater weighting in the evaluation criteria in future rounds of its Scottish Zero Emissions Bus Challenge Fund?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, as the member will know, particularly from my earlier quite long answer, we operate within the legislation, the regulation that we are required to operate within, and if there are to be any changes which the company themselves have said they want to see, that would have to be through the UK Government. When all of this news broke, I was receiving so much advice about what changes we could make. I think one of the recommendations from Labour was, for example, to use the Crown Commercial Services contract, because that had worked in Manchester. But actually that still wouldn't allow you to identify a particular company or a particular location. You have to operate within the law. So if the member wants to see the law changed, then he would have an ally here on delivering those reforms.
Kevin Stewart, to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The well-being of Scottish manufacturing and Scotland's industrial economy is a key priority, which is why the SNP Scottish Government has fought tirelessly against the closure of Grangemouth Oil Refinery and worked to secure the jobs at Alexander Dennis. Can the Cabinet Secretary speak to existing UK Government policies and the negative impact that they have on local job retention in Falkirk and Larbert and in job creation across Scotland?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we want a strong manufacturing sector to drive Scotland's economic growth, and we want to maximise the opportunity for Scotland's industrial sectors. I talked earlier about the number of buses that may be in the pipeline as we make the just transition, particularly from diesel to net zero. So it's about protecting the talent right now. At the end of the day, there's a lot more work UK-wide than there is purely in Scotland, for the sole reason that we've already made a lot of the interventions and investment already. So it is about ensuring that there's a fair share of work right across the UK.
Mark Ruskell, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
It's really welcome that jobs have been saved through the introduction of the furlough scheme for 26 weeks. But what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give that Scottish Enterprise, who have worked with Alexander Dennis for the last 10 years, will ensure this company has a viable future in Scotland after 26 weeks? What will Scottish Enterprise do differently compared to their work over the last 10 years? What will they do more of to ensure there's a viable future?
Deputy First
Minister. Well, I don't think the company have at any point complained about the support that they've already received from Scottish Enterprise, because that support has helped to make improvements and drive productivity growth. The challenge that the company referenced was around securing an order book, and of course they can only draw down the furlough scheme if there is evidence of an order book. I do believe that we need to keep working quite intensely to ensure that we don't end up back here in a few years' time for the reasons that others have set out. Ultimately, there needs to be a secure long-term order book for the company to give its workforce the confidence that it needs.
Willie Rennie, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Well, of course, this is good news. But does the Deputy First Minister agree with Michael Matheson that it is essential to have reform of the Subsidy Control Act to secure the long-term future of Alexander Dennis?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, he's heard in my answer, I think, to Willie Rennie, that is, sorry, an answer to Michael Matheson, that was one of the company's asks in terms of reform. I've set out in some technical detail, I think, where we stand in relation to that. The other one, of course, is around procurement law as well, because although it's a devolved matter, it's still subject to UK-wide and international obligations, which are reserved, and to amend procurement law in order to enable preferential treatment, for example, for domestic manufacturers requires the UK to make changes to its international trade obligations. So Scotland cannot legislate in isolation for that in favour of domestic bidders at the expense of bidders from other countries with which a relevant international trade agreement applies. So I think we need to be conscious of that and make representation to the UK Government if we think that changes need to be made.
Jackie DeBar to be followed by Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the announcement that 400 jobs have been secured as a result of the Scottish Government's intervention and furlough support. Can the Deputy First Minister say any more about this funding and how it will be deployed to secure the future of the Alexander Dennis workforce?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, obviously some of the details of the furlough support are commercially sensitive, but the intention is that this funding will be available to Alexander Dennis once a certain threshold of new orders has been evidenced. And once met, the furlough grant entitles Alexander Dennis to recover 80% of the basic wage costs of its manufacturing staff. And that gives them the much-needed flexibility they need to place employees on furlough during the period when materials for new orders are being sourced, but also crucially ensures the facility will be operationally ready to commence work at the end of the 26-week period.
Megan Gallagher to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Deputy First Minister mentioned in her statement that the furlough support scheme is time limited to a maximum period of 26 weeks. My question is, what happens at 27 weeks should this strategy not work? Because there needs to be, and members have mentioned it here this afternoon, decisive procurement reform. So does the Deputy First Minister accept that if procurement reform does not give domestic manufacturers a fair chance to win contracts, this will result in the offshoring of vital jobs and skills? So my question is, what contingency plans are the Scottish Government currently considering should this strategy not work to make sure that we're not going to lose vital skills and jobs?
Well, I'm determined that it will work. And on the substance of Megan Gallagher's question, there's some really important elements to this. The first is that the furlough funding will only be made available once there is evidence of new orders. So, as I said to Jackie Dunbar, that gives them the time to source materials. Essentially, that's the timescale that the company have identified as being required for preparing for the actual work to arrive. Secondly, that order book, obviously, it needs to constantly be updated and refreshed. In other words, we don't want to end up in the same place again, which is why there needs to be intensive work to ensure that there is a longer pipeline of work in the medium to long term. And then thirdly, in terms of the procurement changes and the Subsidy Control Act, I've obviously gone through the technical details, but there's certainly an appetite from our side of the Chamber to work very collaboratively to see if there are changes that can be delivered through the UK Government.
Paul Sweeney to be followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd also like to commend the work of my colleagues Ian Murray, Secretary of State, and Ewan Steenbank, MP for Falkirk, on their efforts to save bus manufacturing in Scotland, particularly on extending the new UK Procurement Act provisions on social value to Scotland. But ultimately, Scottish bus manufacturing must have the most advanced vehicle production facility in the world to be competitive, and the Government can offer direct subsidy to manufacturers like Alexander Dennis to achieve that, notwithstanding the Subsidy Control Act. So will the Government look to cooperate with the UK Government on benchmarking the site at Camelin, which is antiquated, and making sure it is upgraded and that bus manufacturing facilities in Scotland are competitive?
Well, in short, we will work with anybody to deliver improvements and changes. I have to say that there was a lot of very helpful interventions at the very beginning of this process, and I too commend Ian Murray for taking a number of my calls last minute to try and make progress. And sadly, though, over the last few months, there has not been the progress that we would have liked to see. We've been promised information about a pipeline, hopefully in autumn. Obviously, we're hopefully into autumn fairly soon. We haven't seen the pipeline yet of orders, by which point it would have been too late because the consultation period ended on Monday, having already been extended a few times. So the furlough scheme is entirely Scottish Government. UK Government hasn't provided funding, but where we really need to see their help is through the longer-term pipeline.
Very briefly, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. The furlough scheme is very welcome, but it's contingent on the company providing evidence of orders. So when does the Deputy First Minister need to see that evidence, and how many orders are needed to meet the requirements of the scheme?
Briefly as possible.
Well, that will be brief, because I'm afraid any questions about orders are commercially sensitive, and I look forward to the point at which members can quiz me on any orders that are forthcoming, but at this point in time I'm afraid I'm unable to answer any questions on orders.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. That concludes this item of business. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change. Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 1883 in the name of Angela Constance on Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill at stage 3. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I call on Angela Constance to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, up to 7 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, the core of the Victims, Witness and Justice Reform Scotland Bill is about supporting victims, and I want to begin by recognising everyone who has been impacted by the matters it seeks to address. Victims, witnesses and survivors, families, campaigners and support organisations. Many of you have shared your own lived experience to help shape the bill, and I know how painful that was, and I am grateful for your courage. Presiding Officer, let me speak directly to those people today, whether watching online or joining us in the gallery, as I know some are. You have campaigned for many years for many of the reforms in this bill, which Parliament will vote on tonight. Whilst it will not lessen the pain you have gone through, I hope you will feel a sense of pride and achievement with the changes you have brought about. Presiding Officer, let me also thank the committees that considered the bill, particularly the members of the Criminal Justice Committee, past and present, and their clerks, and the wide range of individuals and organisations who brought significant legal and academic expertise through their engagement with the committee and with the government. I am also grateful to all of those involved in major pieces of work that informed the bill: the Victims Task Force, the Lady Dorian Review, the large-scale jury research, the Victim Notification Scheme Review and the NHS Education Services Trauma Workstream and the Emma Rich Clinic. I also thank my officials in private office for their considerable support and patience throughout the bill's passage. It's fair to say this journey has been a marathon, not a sprint. Presiding Officer, this is a large and ambitious bill with the scope to make fundamental and meaningful changes, ensuring a justice system that meets the needs of sexual events survivors, the majority of whom are women and girls. A justice system where victims are treated with compassion and their voices heard, where processes are modern, fair and transparent, and the rights of the accused continue to be protected, where there is a strong public confidence in justice outcomes, and which will better protect vulnerable parties and witnesses in civil cases. That is what Parliament has the opportunity to support tonight. This bill is a landmark bill of reforms, and I wanted to ensure that I worked collaboratively across the Chamber to reach a consensus wherever possible. And I want everyone to be in a position to back the bill today. It is time to come together. I listened to concerns about piloting single-judge rape trials and took the decision not to pursue this. Instead, bringing forward amendments to enable further research on jury deliberations to help us better understand the impact of rape myths on decision-making. And if Parliament agrees to this bill, I will seek approval from the Lord President to commission this as a priority. Changes made to the bill also reflect the determination to work constructively with MSPs, and I have worked and engaged with all parties, as was seen during Stage 2 and last night's Stage 3. And many MSPs have changed this bill for the better, and I thank each and every one of them. Presiding Officer, I know that cultural changes and new laws this Parliament has introduced means women feel more able to report sexual offences. However, it pains me that so many have to even face the challenges that brings. It is abhorrent that so many women and girls are victims of sexual crime, and whilst I believe that laws and culture can help protect women, we need men to address their abusive behaviour and the attitudes underpinning it, part of the prevention work we carry out through our Equally Safe strategy. The reforms in the bill will implement a trauma-informed justice system and introduce lifelong anonymity and independent legal representation, which will afford greater protection to sexual offence survivors. And I cannot stress enough how essential the creation of a new National Sexual Offences Court will be for improving survivors' experience. Lady Dorian, the Lord Advocate, senior members of the Judiciary, the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, victims and support organisations have all been clear that this standalone specialist court can deliver further improvements in culture, process and practice that will benefit many. MSPs supporting the bill today should be proud of the part that they have played in creating this court, a court we may wish was not needed, but it will benefit so many. And for victims, generally, the Victims and Witness Commissioner will have a significant role to play, ensuring the interests of victims are central to the operation of the justice system. Presiding Officer, I am pleased that there has been cross-party support for the abolition of the not proven verdict from manifesto commitments of several parties to supporting the bill today to bring that change about. There is much to be proud of in our justice system, and there have been many recent positive changes. This bill builds on that with reforms that can create the structural, procedural and cultural shifts required to make improvements for victims, witnesses and survivors. Where we are today has been reached by listening to many voices in advance of and during the passage of the bill. Parliament must demonstrate that it is listening to and is serious about putting victims and witnesses at the heart of our justice system. Presiding Officer, let me conclude by once again quoting Lady Dorian, who explained why reforms in the bill should be supported. If we do not seize the opportunity to create the cultural change from the ground up, there is every risk that in 40 years my successor and your successors will be in this room having the same conversation. Presiding Officer, I move that Parliament agrees the Victims, Witness and Justice Reform Scotland Bill and that it be passed.
Thank you. I now call Liam Kerr up to 6 minutes. Mr Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This bill has had a tortuous passage, a marathon, not a sprint, says the Cabinet Secretary, and that's certainly true. It was originally introduced in April 2023 as the Criminal Justice Reform Bill, and it didn't reach stage 1 until a year later. Since then, it's been through repeated rounds of evidence-taking, fundamental amendments, extensive stages 2 and 3, the introduction of novel and unscrutinised amendments at stage 3, and even the government amending its own draft, only to realise its error and reversing course again. At one point, it even changed its name, becoming the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Bill. Now, on Sunday, the Cabinet Secretary said, "This bill should modernise our criminal justice system in the most radical ways, putting victims right at the very heart of everything." She's absolutely right. It should. But it does not. Now, to be fair, there are some welcome measures. Thanks to Russell Finlay, victims will have greater access to notifications about the outcomes of plea deals. Sharon Dowie, Pam Gossel have strengthened victims' protections through non-harassment orders. The bill also includes improved rights to information for victims of crime and better recognition of child victims and witnesses. These are steps in the right direction. But the bill misses so many chances to do so much more. It could have launched an inquiry into grooming gangs in Scotland to uncover the scale of the problem and prevent further victims of this vile crime. but it does not. It could have extended the parole period from 2 years to 3, giving victims both peace of mind and a respite from the revolving door of parole hearings, but it does not. It could have introduced a genuine Suzanne's law, no body, no release, but it does not. And instead, Presiding Officer, the headline reforms are deeply flawed. The so-called Specialist Sexual Offences Court has been described as little more than a sign on a door. Simon De Rollo Casey has called it window dressing. It will use the same judges in the same buildings with the same overstretched staff and potentially add to the existing backlog. Rape survivors have deep concerns about what their cases not being heard in the High Court will mean. Ellie Wilson told the Justice Committee, "Rape is one of the most serious crimes in Scots law. Such cases are only ever heard in the High Court. That solemnity is sacred, and it is important that we maintain it." It will cost millions that could instead have been invested in trauma-informed practice in our existing courts and in tackling that backlog that leaves rape victims waiting up to 3 years for justice. The Law Society, of which I remind the Chamber I'm a member, warns it will increase complexity, noting that specialist divisions could achieve the same thing. And Children First have said it could distract from the clear, practical changes that victims and witnesses consistently tell us would make things better. Presiding Officer, the bill also establishes a Victims Commissioner, an idea England adopted over 20 years ago. But this Commissioner will have no power to intervene in individual cases. It cannot investigate grooming gangs. It cannot address the crisis in legal aid or indeed the court backlog, which is why it's unsurprising that Scottish Women's Aid have said, "We maintain our opposition to the creation of this Commissioner. This will add a layer of bureaucracy. Funds could be better utilised, improving services and advice to victims." And then we come to the changes to the trial system itself. The Cabinet Secretary candidly admitted and raised that the government originally proposed juryless rape trials, abandoned only after overwhelming expert opposition, threats of legal boycotts and warnings that it would lead to miscarriages of justice. But as the Cabinet Secretary noted, the Conservative manifesto did commit to abolish the not proven verdict. And that could have been done simply and effectively. But instead, the government has decided to go much further with changes that strike at the heart of the Scottish criminal justice system. You see, as well as changing the verdicts in the context of the Lord Advocate's corroboration changes, a system consistently featuring since at least the 1600s, they've also changed the size of the jury majority following a back and forth around its size. Presiding Officer, if we are going to change a system that has worked for over 200 years, we need a strong basis to found upon. This government has not got it. 3 of the 4 key features of our criminal trial system will be altered, largely without evidence, largely without precedent, and against expert advice. We have all received the warnings that this rebuilt system could be counterproductive. It could reduce conviction rates. It could lead to more miscarriages of justice and even worse outcomes for victims. The Law Society has been clear. We are concerned that the model proposed has never been proved effective in any other comparable jurisdiction. The lack of evidence to support the proposals may lead to unintended consequences in the fairness of criminal trials. Presiding Officer, this bill is entitled the Victims and Witnesses Bill. It does do some good things, but it fails to do what it could have, and it makes changes that may well fail and could even be counterproductive. It is a victims bill in name only and represents a massively missed opportunity to truly put victims at the heart of justice. What we have here is neither for victims nor for witnesses, and that is why we will vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Polly McNeill up to 5 minutes. Ms McNeill.
This has been the most difficult bill that I've ever dealt with in the Criminal Justice Committee because in its entirety it deals with whole-scale reform of the criminal justice system, overturning years of established systems that fit together, so it's not simple to pick apart. There's been considerable focus on the systems and actually, at the early stages, not on victims. Abolishing the not proven verdict at the beginning, the bill contained abolishing the jury system for some trials. There's a lot to deal with in this bill, but there isn't the kind of consensus for some of the big legal principles, such as the size of the jury, following the removal of the not proven verdict. There are many big issues that arrived at stage 2 and stage 3 that were not properly scrutinised. I was not comfortable with this, and yesterday I did my best to follow all the late amendments, but I have to be honest and say that I didn't understand all of what was trying to be achieved, and that's because there simply was not enough time, and I don't think that's satisfactory. The debate on the jury size and the balance for convictions within the jury has not achieved the kind of positive consensus when you're making substantive change, and there is no way of knowing whether we have retained the same balance of interest on how this change will affect convictions. We'll just need to wait and see. A lot of what the bill tries to achieve, as I said yesterday, could be done without legislation. In fact, culture change, I would argue, has already started. There's a strong consensus that the experience of victims of sexual assault has not been good enough, and there's been an imperative, as the Cabinet Secretary has said, because we need a fundamental change in society towards women and girls. And we know that 2/3 of the crimes in the High Court are now sexual offences. And I actually believe that the leadership of the Government, the Lord Advocate and the judiciary and victim support and rape crisis have paved the way for some of the changes that are already happening, tackling jury myths, evidence by commission, the law corroborations being changed, and the extended use of the Murav Doctrine are already things that are beginning to change the culture and hopefully for the better. Trauma-informed practice should be standard practice and can be embedded in any court. Scottish Labour welcome independent legal representation, but we would have liked to have gone further on that. And we note changes to the victim notification scheme, which are good, and communicating with victims. But the real test will be whether this bill, in fact, will be the transformative change for victims that the Government promises. But a lot of what we've heard so far is the Government asking us to trust that we've got it right, but we don't have any evidence that they do. Because if victims are to be given more agency and engagement, for example, with the Crown, as we've heard, they are far more likely to feel they've had a positive experience. And I believe, and I've argued, victims must have the right to meet their advocate in advance of a trial to give them the agency they deserve. And one of the most traumatising things for victims is the delay. It's the thing that comes up all the time, and this is at the heart of what I think the argument is. Well, we haven't heard promises of extra resources for the court system, but unless you fix the shortages of defence lawyers and make sure there are enough people to staff any new court or the existing court system, this bill will not adequately address the problems of delay. The Scottish Government are saying that structural change is the answer, but as I've said, I'm concerned that this legislation will not deliver the promises that it claims. The Sexual Offences Court is certainly the flagship of the bill, a new court insofar as it will have natural jurisdiction over solemn cases. But I agree with Liam Kerr on this. It's a sign over the door. And there's a lot of organisational change. We're not clear that it will result in any difference in a reduction in the delay that victims experience. It's a very large claim to make. And I have a real worry about that, a genuine worry that the delay will not... I did suggest an alternative way, and I wholeheartedly believe that having a specialist division in the High Court for victims of sexual assault and similarly in the Sheriff Court would have been I think, a better and practical way of achieving the same thing. And I also want to put on record that I personally agree with Ellie Wilson on this. Fundamentally, I am not in favour of taking rape out of the High Court. You may disagree with that, but I believe it's one of the most heinous crimes. We know it because it's a plea to the Crown. That's why it is. And I think we can embed the kind of practices that without the legislation, it's quite clear. For these reasons, Presiding Officer, Scottish Labour will not be voting with the Government tonight. We'll be voting against the bill.
Thank you. I now call Maggie Chapman up to 4 minutes. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I remind colleagues of my register of interests. I used to work for a rape crisis centre. We are here today to debate legislation that has the potential to transform how Scotland's justice system treats those who have been harmed, particularly survivors of rape, sexual assault and other serious offences. For too long, survivors have been asked to carry the heaviest burden, to repeat and relive their trauma in a system that was not designed with them in mind. The Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Bill gives us a chance to shift that balance. It's not just about small adjustments. It's about moving from a system centred on procedure to one centred on people, on those who have been harmed, on those asked to give evidence, and on those who need the system to work fairly for them. The foundations of this bill are the recommendations of Lady Dorrian's review. That work was clear. Sexual offence cases are failing survivors, failing to protect dignity and failing to deliver consistent justice. The provisions on specialist courts, on trauma-informed judicial duties and on measures to reduce delay and re-traumatisation all stem from her recommendations. The Lord Advocate, too, has been clear that reform is necessary if prosecution is to be both effective and fair. Third sector organisations have been vital in shaping this bill. Rape Crisis Scotland has reminded us that survivors experience the justice system not just as discrete hearings, but as one long ordeal. Victim Support Scotland has called this legislation a landmark chance to embed trauma-informed practice and transparency. They and others have told us that the bill must shorten that ordeal, reduce re-traumatisation and make support an active offer at every stage. And I am very grateful for all of their contributions. I welcome many provisions of the bill: the statutory duty to act in a trauma-informed way, stronger protections for complainers' anonymity, reforms to the victim notification scheme, the right to independent legal representation to oppose intrusive questioning on sexual history, the establishment of a sexual offences court, and the abolition of the not proven verdict. These are practical, evidence-based steps. They reflect the principle that survivors must be treated with dignity. But let's be clear, Scottish Greens believe this bill should have gone further. Survivors need support from the moment they report, not weeks later. That means properly resourced referral pathways so survivors know what support they can access, whether rape crisis services, victim support services, legal advice or something else. It means embedding consistency across the country, so a survivor in Shetland is offered the same level of support as someone in Glasgow. And that support must be throughout the legal process and beyond. That's why I brought the amendments at stage 2 that I did, to extend advocacy, legal advice and legal representation available. We also need to be honest about resources. Legal reform without investment in specialist services risks leaving survivors with rights on paper but not in practice. A trauma-informed duty for judges must be matched by training, by court scheduling that avoids last-minute cancellations, and by proper facilities in every sheriffdom. And we must remain ambitious. Lady Dorrian's work showed us that specialist sexual offence courts are possible and necessary, but we must also ensure that they are resourced, staffed with trained judiciary and rolled out with urgency. Reforming our justice system is not optional. Survivors have waited too long for change. This bill is a start, but we must not pretend it is the end of that journey. The Scottish Greens support this bill, and we will continue to push for a justice system that is preventative, trauma-informed and truly centred on those who have been harmed. Let us all commit today to legislation that makes a real difference. Let us choose compassion, dignity and justice for survivors.
Thank you. I now call Jamie Green again, up to 4 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I'm often asked when schools come to visit, what is the best part of being an MSP? Is it helping constituents? Is it meeting inspiring people? Is it changing the law? Well, today I say all three be true, because every one of the 160 amendments that we debated yesterday have real-world consequences. The removal of the centuries-old not proven verdict, the Victims Commissioner and other sweeping changes to our justice system, the likes of which this Parliament has not seen since its very creation. In my case, the introduction of Suzanne's Law, which commands the confidence of those to whom it matters most, to me, the introduction of Michelle's Law, changes to parole decisions and the rules around that, giving victims a greater voice in court, giving them more information, not less. Now look, I joined the Justice Committee back in 2021 when I was then Shadow Justice Secretary. And week in, week out, we took evidence from ministers, from lawyers and academics. But do you know what sticks in my mind the most about that period is the evidence sessions we took in private. The horrific stories of abuse and assault and rape and murder. Now, I first consulted on my own Members' Bill back in 2021 because with so many wrongs to right, I understood the gravity of the task in hand, the lack of victims' voices and the endless traumatisation in the justice system. And I was simply appalled at what I heard, to be honest. But it's incredibly difficult to get a Members' Bill through this place. So, for me, perhaps serendipitously, the Scottish Government launched its own Criminal Justice Reform Bill. But the Government soon realised that the word victim needed to be at the front of that bill, as it did in mine, and so it changed. Of course, they say imitation is the best form of flattery, but I don't really care, because what matters to me is how do I get these proposals onto the face of law by whichever means possible. And yesterday, Presiding Officer, we did just that. We did that. Victims in all solemn cases can now make an impact statement to court. They must be informed of a decision not to prosecute a case. They will have their safety and security put front and centre of parole decisions. They will have exclusion zones if required or necessary. They will be given reasons for these decisions. They will be guided through their justice journey, and they will know that if the killer of their loved one refuses to cooperate, then that person will stay behind bars. Every political party represented in this Parliament, to some degree or another, supported these changes and voted for them. Constructive, respectful negotiations, because that is how you get things done from the opposition benches in this place. I'm grateful to members, the ones that backed my proposals, but I am more grateful to those who let me sat in their living room with a mug and tea in hand whilst they recounted the absolute horror of the crimes that they and their loved ones had been victims of. And I say to those in the gallery here today who live and breathe that trauma every day, it is to them we owe the most credit to get to where we are today, because it is your relentless campaigning to put victims first that I believe has finally paid off. Now, I made them a promise, face to face, that I would fight to change the law in their favour, and I sincerely hope I will have met their expectations today. Now, I also believe that there are members in this Parliament who will never have voted for this bill, whatever its content. But I would say to them, if you vote against this bill, you're voting against your own manifesto commitments. If you vote against this bill, you're voting against every positive change we've made yesterday, and you're ignoring the pleas from those whose voices matter most, victims themselves. Now, 2 members of those families sent me a quote they want me to read, and it simply says this: "We implore you to vote through this bill for this and all the positive changes it can bring." And I say to them, I know when I next meet them, I will look them in the eye and say, I did. So members, if you don't listen to me, listen to them, to whom this bill's passing matters most. Please.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Audrey Nicholl, then Douglas Ross. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So it's safe to say the passage of the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill has been long, complex and challenging, and rightly so, given the transformational ambition of the bill deriving from the Lady Dorian Review, and that centres on delivering meaningful change for victims and witnesses in the justice system. And I too thank everyone who contributed to the shape of the bill as it stands with us here today at Stage 3. So the extensive debates at all stages reflected the breadth of the bill, but also our collective desire to shift the dial on the common but often justified perception that the system fails to adequately support those it is meant to protect. And I quote the words of a survivor who gave powerful evidence to the Criminal Justice Committee at Stage 1. She said, "When we talk about what happened, each one of us mentions the exact date that our case went to trial. We remember the date that we were raped, we also remember the date that we went to trial, because they are as traumatic as each other. So, speaking as a member, not convener, of the Criminal Justice Committee, but also through the lens of a career in policing, for me, the bill presents a huge opportunity for us to create a contemporary and modern justice system that we can be proud of. Now, there's not enough time to comment on all the provisions proposed in the bill, so I want to reflect on a couple of the provisions. Firstly, the removal of the not proven verdict and the establishment of a specialist sexual offences court. But first, though, I want to thank everyone, including campaigners and colleagues, for their efforts in making the case for free court transcripts. And I hope that this proves to be a small but meaningful option for survivors as they move on from their experience of sexual crime. So, turning to the not proven verdict, there is no doubt that this verdict has had its day and should be abolished. During scrutiny, some argued that the not proven verdict is a unique and historical feature of the Scottish legal system and it should be retained. But that is hardly a good reason to keep this verdict. Indeed, the Criminal Justice Committee heard compelling evidence about the devastating impact that the verdict, which cannot be defined, can have on victims, and even for the accused, it can be an unsatisfactory outcome which leaves a lingering stigma. So, turning to the creation of the Specialist Sexual Offences Court, a key reform in the bill and informed by survivors and their families and many others. So, this proposal is supported by victims, stakeholders and leading members of the justice system, and it provides a real opportunity to reform practice, process and culture, improving efficiency and effectiveness, reducing the number and frequency of unnecessary court adjournments, and ensuring that cases reach trial more quickly. The status quo is simply not an option, and I agree with the Cabinet Secretary's view that creating specialist divisions of the High Court and Sheriff Courts, and I quote, prioritises hierarchies, status and tradition over progressive and practical solutions that will improve the experience of complainers in sexual offences cases. So there is so much more to say. However, to conclude, we have seen some meaningful change over decades in culture, legislation and attitudes, but we need to do so much more. I urge members to support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Douglas Ross to be followed by Christine Graham. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I remind the Chamber of my register of interest, my wife is a sergeant with Police Scotland. The Cabinet Secretary knows she has the numbers. She has worked hard with some parties to get this over the line, and I think it was Monday or Tuesday of this week we knew the Greens were going to support it before we discussed the 160 amendments that Jamie Green alluded to earlier. So this bill will pass. But I can't help feel, having sat through yesterday's Stage 3 amendments, having looked at the work done by the Justice Committee, that this is a missed opportunity. Because I think there was an opportunity here for the Cabinet Secretary not just to have a majority in favour of this bill, but a unanimous decision of this Parliament to support a bill that really made a difference for victims and witnesses. We all want to see an improvement for anyone who goes through the horrific and horrendous experience of being a victim of crime, some of the most serious crimes we can ever imagine. We all want to make it better for people to be involved in the justice system, to be a witness, to give evidence. And I personally think it's sometimes some of the most harrowing cases I've ever had to deal with as a constituency representative, is those who have gone into the legal system, either as a victim or as a witness, and have come out of it almost more traumatised by that experience than the crime itself. So I do think there was an opportunity here with this bill to make a difference that all of us could get behind and support. And I gently say to Jamie Green, and I don't think he was absolutely doing this, but I don't think you can shame opposition members for opposing this bill because there are good elements within it. There are undoubtedly elements within this bill that I personally support. I know there are families in the chamber that would like MSPs to all back it because of the individual elements that they have rightly
and fiercely campaigned on for so long. But that doesn't mean we can ignore the elements of the bill that I believe could have been improved if the Justice Secretary had just gone a bit further yesterday in the Stage 3 amendments or at Stage 2. As Liam Kerr says, the Conservatives have made this bill better, I think, with the amendments from Russell Finlay, from Sharon Dowie and from Pam Gossel. But I still can't understand and get my head around an opportunity in this bill to launch a national inquiry into grooming gangs, something that we see all over the news, all over the media, something that the Labour government at Westminster originally tried to do the same and refused, but had to eventually U-turn because of public pressure. I'm pretty sure in a number of weeks, months or maybe years, and sadly if it gets to years it will be far too late, that an incumbent Scottish Government will have to do the same. Why not take the opportunity in this bill? And I have to say on sexual offences courts, and this is the amendment I spoke to yesterday, I understand there is disagreements on this, some believing that this is the right approach and some believing it would be the wrong approach. And I have to say the Cabinet Secretary's response to proposals put to her were dismissive of an alternative. She believes her option is the only option, but as Pauline McNeill said yesterday, that is not the case. This is a proposal that is going to cost a lot of money. Money, I think, could be better spent in the current justice system with changes. And I understand Lady Dorian doesn't agree with specialised units or divisions within the High Court. But Lady Dorian also doesn't agree with the approach the Government have now taken forward on the Sexual Offences Court. So I do believe that is another missed opportunity. I would genuinely have been pleased to be able to vote for the Victims and Witnesses Bill today. But I can't, and it's with a heavy heart that I can't, because I think it could have been so much better. It could have done so much more for the victims and witnesses across Scotland, and I sadly believe it's a missed opportunity. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, Christine Graham, briefly.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I congratulate all engaged in this bill, but I also consider that to allocate just over 1 hour to debate these radical changes to the delivery and pursuit of our criminal law is misplaced. I shall make just a few remarks. Steps to better steer witnesses with compassion through the court's process must be welcomed. I am not convinced of the need for specialist sexual offences courts. I pose this question. An individual is indicted for robbery, assault with a threat to life and sexual assault. 3 different victims. In which court should this be held? The majority in size of juries seems to me untried. The removal of the not proven verdict may make convictions more difficult, whether before a sheriff sitting alone or before a jury. The test applicable across summary and solemn proceedings is still that the Crown has to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt. The onus is on the Crown. Not proven meant there was still a reasonable doubt, and now that transfers seamlessly to not guilty considerations. I think some campaigning organisations may believe this makes convictions together with jury size more likely, and I do understand why. But in my view, it will not, and at best, it may be neutral. So as the not proven verdict is consigned to history, I have marked down my reservations, and I sincerely hope my concerns about unintended consequences do not come to pass. And despite those concerns and reservations, I will support the bill at decision time, but I will watch how it works in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. We now go to the closing speeches, and I call first Maggie Chapman, up to 4 minutes. Ms Chapman.
Thank you. We are treated like outsiders throughout the whole process. I was told by a police detective that I wasn't raped, it was consensual. When you are on the witness stand, you should not be made to feel embarrassed, humiliated, undermined by someone. In our court system, you are totally humiliated. It was the most degrading experience I have been through. You are made to feel as if you're a bit of evidence that just gets put on the shelf and is brought out when you're needed, and you're just disregarded afterwards. Presiding Officer, as we close this debate, I return to the people at the heart of it. Those who have survived sexual violence, those who have stood as witnesses in court, those who have too often been re-victimised by the very system meant to protect them. Their words should be in our minds this afternoon. We have heard throughout this process the evidence from Lady Doreen's review, from the Lord Advocate and from those on the front line of support, Rape Crisis Scotland, Victim Support Scotland, Scottish Women's Aid and so many others. Their message has been consistent. Our current system is not working well. Survivors face long delays, hostile environments and re-traumatising procedures. Change is not just desirable, it is imperative. This bill is a step toward that change. The statutory duty of trauma-informed practice, the new protections for complainers, reforms to victim notification, the introduction of independent legal representation are all important and welcome. They are measures that survivors themselves have called for over and over again, and measures that can rebuild confidence in the justice system. But we must also be honest about where we are falling short, as others have said. The Greens have been clear we need stronger guarantees of early and consistent support for all survivors, not just the possibility of a referral, but the expectation of it. We need all survivors to have access to legal advice and representation for as long as they need it. We need our criminal and civil justice systems to be better connected, to talk to each other, to ensure women and children aren't used as pawns in someone else's game. We need the reforms we will deliver on paper today to translate into meaningful change in people's lives across our country. Because survivors deserve more than just symbolic progress. And we must also guard against complacency. Passing this bill is not the end of the journey. Trauma-informed practice is not achieved by statute alone. It must be embedded in training, in scheduling, in the culture of our courts. The Lord Advocate and Crown Office must play their part, ensuring decisions are explained clearly and respectfully, and that the pursuit of justice does not add to a survivor's pain. Yes, I will.
Christine Graham, briefly.
To do so, and I know your time is so constricted, but do you think there's a place here in our education system in schools to educate with regard to the general legal process and juries, what a jury is and is not?
Always through the chair, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, and I thank Christine Graham for that intervention. Absolutely, education for all of us about the legal system, our criminal justice system, all of our system is imperative for this. But we also know that as we pass this bill today and as we work on what it aims to achieve, our third sector partners will continue to hold us to account, and rightly so. Rape Crisis Scotland, Victim Support Scotland and others have stressed that survivors do not see the system as separate parts, but as one long process. We owe it to them, to the people they support, to keep going until our justice system is worthy of the name. For the Scottish Greens, this is about principle. Justice is not just about verdicts. It's about reducing harm, restoring dignity and preventing further violence. That is why we support this bill and why we will continue to press for more along these lines and others, for restorative approaches where appropriate, for prevention, for survivor-centred practice in every centre of the system. So let us pass this bill today, not as the end point, but as the beginning of a transformation in how Scotland delivers justice. Survivors deserve nothing less.
Thank you. I now call Katie Clark again, up to 4 minutes. Ms Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to close this debate on behalf of Scottish Labour. We remain concerned that this bill may have unintended consequences and disappoint victims, and are also concerned at the significant amendments brought by the Scottish Government at Stage 3, for example, on victim notification and the rape shield, which were not considered by the committee. We are not opposed in principle to these proposals, but these are major changes which required consultation and scrutiny. Whilst much of what we proposed and argued for at Stage 2 on victim notification, such as a single point of contact, has been agreed and accepted by the Government, the amendments lodged by the Government at Stage 3 extend to many areas not scrutinised by the committee. As I say, there should have been consultation and scrutiny. We welcome that the Scottish Government did not proceed with the most polarising part of the original bill, non-jury rape trials. These were controversial and we do not believe were the top demand of victims. Indeed, many of the rape survivors that we spoke to said that the jury was not an issue for them. It is unclear how the changes on jury size, jury majority and the impact that the abolition of the not proven verdict will have on conviction rates. One of the most significant complaints from complainers, however, was the delay they experience in the system. And we are concerned that the unintended consequence of this bill could be to cause further delays with the massive reorganisation required to create new courts. Even if extra resource is put into the new courts, this will leave less resource for the High and Sheriff Courts, who may continue to deal with many rape and sexual offence cases. We would have been more supportive if the proposals had been more radical, with new buildings and infrastructure, so that a very different environment was being created. The reality, however, is these new courts will use the same buildings and the same rooms, and the complainer is likely to be walking into a very similar setup with new signage. We support radical cultural change and embedding trauma-informed practice throughout the system for victims and witnesses. We believe that the experience of other countries is that one of the most effective ways of delivering justice for victims is by empowering them within the system. And yesterday I spoke about some of the international examples of where victims have been given stronger voices and more access to information. We believe that by giving, I think Rona Mackay's attempting, I'm happy to take an intervention.
Rona Mackay, briefly.
Thank the member for taking the intervention. Does the member not think that by her party, and the Conservative Party, not voting for this bill, you are letting down victims and witnesses? Despite all the good things that are in this bill, you're prepared to not vote for it?
I think the whole of my speech addresses. I think the whole of my speech addresses the point that Rona Mackay is making, that there are many proposals in this bill that we do agree with. Indeed, many of them don't actually require legislation. For example, if you look at Part 1 of the bill, the proposals around trauma-informed practices, as I've said, that's something we strongly support. That should be happening already, and government needs to be driving those policies. We strongly support that, but we don't need this bill to do that. And we think that warm words isn't what's needed today, but the kind of very real action that will improve the experiences of victims and witnesses within the system. And our view is that giving access to information, independent legal advice and representation, and enabling their voices to be heard within the system is probably one of the most powerful steps that could be taken. I don't know if I've got time, Presiding Officer, because I took an intervention. So we welcome the very narrow provisions on independent legal representation in relation to access to medical records. But we believe that far more needs to be done. This bill was far too large, and the committee attempted to give equal scrutiny to different parts of the bill, but inevitably much of the scrutiny focused on proposals which have now been removed from the bill, and too many parts of this bill received little or no scrutiny and were added late. So unfortunately, on this occasion, we're unable to support the government.
Thank you, Ms Clark. I now call Sharon Dowie. Up to 5 minutes, Ms Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start by acknowledging that the bill does contain some improvements, and I welcome that the Government backed my amendments to toughen up non-harassment orders and allow for a review to notify victims when fiscal fines are issued. However, taken together, this bill fails to deliver the meaningful changes to the criminal justice system that victims in Scotland are crying out for. Firstly, as Katie Clark just said, it was far too big. It should have been broken up long ago, but instead it's been made even bigger, with some significant changes introduced by the Government at the very last minute, without proper scrutiny, as Liam Kerr and Pauline McNeill made clear last night. But then we come to what the bill actually does. It creates a Victims Commissioner, and on paper this sounds wonderful. If we had limitless resources, then that would be one thing, but we do not. The truth is, it lacks teeth and has no ability to intervene in individual cases, providing false hope to victims that it could directly help them, while taking away resources that could instead be invested in victim support services, as Scottish Women's Aid have warned us. Yesterday, I tried to strengthen the role by giving the Commissioner the power to obtain information from local authorities and social housing providers, but it was voted down. This Parliament set up a cross-party committee to look into the role of Commissioners, which concluded only a few months ago that creating new bodies to address public service failures or perceived public service failures isn't necessarily effective, and nor is it sustainable. Meanwhile, Children First have said that a Commissioner should not be brought in as a substitute for concrete actions to improve the experiences of victims and witnesses, and I agree with them. Victims are being failed, but all we are doing here is creating yet another Commissioner of debatable effectiveness and saying "job well done" without having changed much. I do admit that the Government have done a great job on the branding of the bill, because creating a new sexual offences court also sounds brilliant, but, as Douglas Ross laid out yesterday, when you scratch the surface, you realise it's little more than an expensive sign on a door, in the same court buildings, with the same judges and the same staff. I welcome the requirement for training and trauma-informed practice, but I believe, as Pauline McNeill has outlined, that rather than setting up a whole new court and the huge expense that comes with it, we could instead create a specialist division in the existing courts and focus our resources there, where we know they are badly needed. The Faculty of Advocates and the Law Society have both said this would be more effective, while Children First said they feared creating a new court would distract from making the changes that victims and witnesses argue would make things better. Simon DeRollo KC even called it window dressing. Once again, we are patting ourselves on the back without having addressed the real issues. Then we come to changes in jury majorities. As Liam Kerr said, this was decided without any hard evidence, despite the liberty of our constituents literally being on the line, with the changes largely based on mock jury research that experts like Lord Ranucci KC warned do not in any way mirror what really happens in the courts. I tried to stop this by submitting an amendment that would put us in line with the tried and tested system in England and Wales and other jurisdictions, but it was defeated in favour of a step into the unknown. It's hard not to conclude that this bill does anything other than waste millions on cosmetic solutions that will make little difference to victims while ignoring the real issues. Victims deserve real change, but the bill does not deliver. What is most disappointing is what could have been. We urge the Government to accept our amendments that would have made fundamental changes and delivered a victims' bill worthy of the name. Russell Finlay tried to deliver a real Suzanne's Law with no body, no parole, and common sense reforms so that victims are not left in the dark regarding plea deals. Liam Kerr tried to deliver a Scottish grooming gangs inquiry. I tried to ensure victims were notified about decisions not to prosecute, but they were all voted down. As a result, this is a victims' bill in name only, and it's with a very heavy heart that I will be voting against it today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Angela Constance to wind up to 6 minutes, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I don't want to pollute today with partisan comments, because at the end of the day, victims will judge for themselves whether they see through any contortions or manufactured grievances. As parliamentarians, we have had our debates and we've had our disputes through stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3, and I believe the bill is all the better for it. We've all had debates and amendments that we have won and lost at some point during this legislative process. But debate today is not about repeating or reheating or rehashing those old debates. Today is about putting our past battles behind us, because ultimately it's not about us. Presiding Officer, today is about the people gathered in the public gallery behind us and about the many victims and survivors and victim support organisations, the length and breadth of this country. And I do want to, once again, Presiding Officer, thank everyone for their thoughtful consideration and engagement in the Victims' Witness and Justice Reform Bill for their remarks this afternoon. And for the record, the bill was introduced with its current title. And can I also say to Jamie Green, I made a promise too the day that I introduced this bill that I would see it through and do everything that I could. And I do believe that this Parliament can be proud of the significant reforms that this bill will introduce that will support victims and witnesses in our justice system. And I would just like to remind Parliament of those. It will introduce a new champion for victims by establishing a Victims and Witness Commissioner that will have oversight of a Victims Charter, powers to require criminal justice bodies to respond, and if they don't, they'll have a route to the Court of Session, a Victims Commissioner with purpose and power to hold to account the implementation of trauma-informed approaches that will see the re-traumatisation of victims and supporting, not just now, and supporting victims and witnesses to give their best evidence, because that surely is in the interests of fairness. This bill will introduce radical improvements to how sexual offences are dealt with through the creation of a new sexual offences court, a court that will, in its establishment, compel change. And I just couldn't accept an alternative that only gave the power to courts and didn't see that through by compelling them to change. And of course, there's the abolition of not proven, a long debate that has ensured that the change will now happen, a change that's long overdue. And some of the evidence of the support to abolish not proven goes back decades, and indeed even to Michael McMahon's Members' Bill, which of course was unsuccessful at the time, but I think speaks to the value of Members' Bills irrespective of whether they complete their journey or not. And yes, there is reform in the Victim Notification Scheme to ensure victims can be supported, informed and ultimately empowered. And rape is the most serious offence, not because it is prosecuted in the higher court. It is because it is the most degrading crime that a woman can experience. Other improvements are around the parole process, including requiring the parole board to take into account whether a prisoner has information about the disposal of a victim's remains but has not disclosed it. Trauma-informed approaches embedded with a duty, a statutory duty on criminal justice bodies, protecting the privacy of victims through lifelong anonymity for sexual offence victims, new independent legal representation for victims where the court has been asked to look into a victim's character and sexual history, and strengthening protections for victims through reforms to non-harassment orders and other protective orders. Presiding Officer, that is the transformation that parliamentarians have the power to agree today by supporting the bill. And yes, indeed, it is a big bill, but as someone once said to me, you do as much as you can for as long as you can. And I know we are all attached to our tradition and our history, not least in our very unique legal system in Scotland, which of course we're all proud of and will do everything we can to safeguard. But as Lady Elise Angelini says, our justice system doesn't stand still due to tradition. The great thing about Scottish justice is that it does look at itself and it does move and it does develop. Presiding Officer, our justice system needs reforms so that those who become part of it, whether as victims or witnesses of crime, feel safe and informed and are treated with understanding. This bill is needed to ensure that the structural, procedural and cultural change that will put victims and witnesses at the heart of a much more modern and fair justice system is created. And, Presiding Officer, let me conclude by urging, even at this late stage, to urge appeal to all parliamentarians, not to let victims, their family and their support organisations down today. They want to know that we have heard them and that we are giving them our full support to this bill. We need to let those who we seek to serve know that their pain has not been in vain and that we are with them in their creation of a legacy that comes from their loss. Presiding Officer, I do appeal that we come together and back this bill.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill at Stage 3. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 18921 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And I call on Liz Smith.
Thank you. Just for parliamentary transparency and in line with the letter that I received from the Minister for Children and Young People on the 4th of September, I wonder if I could have confirmation on the record for next week that there will be a ministerial statement on the Schools Residential Outdoor Education Scotland Bill, even if the Minister for Parliamentary Business can't actually confirm the time for that. And may I also put on the record, Presiding Officer, that I'm very grateful to the Minister for Children and Young People for arranging to meet with me tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you. And I call on Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I agree with everything Liz Smith has just said. But I want to move the subject on slightly. You will know, Presiding Officer, I've tried numerous times this week to get a statement on Minister Jim Fairley's Seagull Summit, which is happening next Tuesday. Now, you have competing demands to deal with and have your own reasons for not selecting them, and I respect that. But I now have, through parliamentary procedures, an opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes on this issue. And the reason I want to raise it is because what the Minister is now doing next Tuesday is a sham and a farce. He came to this chamber months ago and said this: "I will have a summit later this year to discuss with members and the people who are raising these issues." Well, the summit he plans to go ahead with next Tuesday is excluding members because politicians are not invited. It's excluding the public because it's not open to the public, and it's excluding the press as well. So a cast-iron commitment given in this Parliament for a meaningful summit is now turning into an SNP talking shop, and they'll be talking to themselves. Because what we're going to get is Jim Fairley sitting at Great Glen House, which is the headquarters of Nature Scot, listening to his officials, listening to himself and listening to Quango bosses, and not listening to the public in the north. I will give way in a moment. I'm glad the Minister's interested in this because the government haven't been so far, but not listening to the public who have been raising repeated concerns about this issue. Now, the point about the location is important because Fergus Ewing wrote to the Minister and asked for this to be held in a neutral venue. He suggested Eden Court. But Nature Scot said no, this must be held at Great Glen House so they could have the broadband connection to live stream the summit to a wider audience. This week, Nature Scot have said they are going to now refuse to live stream it. So the whole reason for having it at their own headquarters has now been thrown out. And on that point, I'll give way to the Minister.
I just wonder at what stage Mr Ross might speak to the business motion before us, Presiding Officer. And as an aside, I can say I've not had any request sent to me for a statement in this matter as a matter of public record. I think it's important to make that point.
I'll get there. In the next 3 minutes, I'll get there because we have up to 5 minutes. And the reason that there hadn't been a statement request is I was looking at other opportunities. I put in a topical question request. I put in an urgent question request yesterday. I put in an urgent question request today. They were not selected, so I'm now using the opportunity afforded to every MSP to speak for up to 5 minutes on a topic of their choice that they would like to see in the business motion going forward.
Just for clarity and for all members, this is an opportunity to speak to items that members wish to see in a future business programme.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I want. And the reason I think it's important that we set out why this is an issue is that at the moment the SNP Minister is going to go ahead with something that doesn't meet any of the conditions that he himself said. It is not being independently chaired. It's been chaired by the Minister for a short period, then he's jumping into his ministerial car and heading down the road again. It's not been held in a neutral venue. It's been held in the headquarters of Nature Scot, who are the biggest bloc in this whole process, and it is not being made available and open to the public. The business improvement districts of both Nairn and Inverness were involved in trying to set this up and are now considering themselves whether they should even go to this event. So what I would like to see in this business motion is for the Scottish Government to postpone the summit on Tuesday and to make a statement to Parliament next week on the postponement and what they will do to make this a truly open and reflective summit where members of the public can give their views directly to the Minister. So he doesn't sit behind a closed door in Nature Scot and listen to people who agree with him or to people he agrees with. He listens to the public. I will briefly give way to Rachel Hamilton.
Rachel Hamilton.
Presiding officer, we have the same issues of seagulls attacking constituents in Eyemouth. I asked him fairly directly what would happen in terms of the representation of constituents in Eyemouth to the Seagull Summit, and he replied that he would share the recommendations from the Seagull Summit. I would absolutely 100% back my colleagues' recommendations to have a statement here in this Parliament, because this government is not listening to our constituents about the threats of seagulls in our constituencies.
In conclusion, Mr Ross.
And in conclusion, they're not listening to anyone who disagrees with them. We've been told that there's going to be a pest controller there next Tuesday to give an update. This is the same pest controller whose idea to control the gull numbers was to pick up eggs and chicks and take them to wildlife sanctuaries, but the same pest controller who said that wouldn't be possible to implement in the Highlands and Islands where this is being held. So can I plead to the Minister that the Government listen to the concerns of business improvement districts, politicians across the political spectrum and members of the public who would like to see this summit postponed next week and a truly open, transparent and listening summit rearranged in the future at a neutral venue open to the public, and we'll include that in the business next week.
I call on Jamie Hepburn to respond on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau.
Well, let me do what Mr Ross did not do and speak to the business motion before us. But as an aside, let me say the Tories have a new business manager. I can't say it speaks much for Mr Ross's confidence in him when he hasn't decided to go and speak to his business manager to raise this matter with me. I can hear the Conservatives decrying
Let's
that.
Hear
I
the
have
Minister.
not had a single representation from the Conservative business manager on this issue. I've had plenty of other issues, but not this issue. And if Mr Ross cares to go via his business manager, as is the normal practice, and he cares to raise this with me, I'll give it every consideration. Of course I'll give way to Mr Ross.
Well, I'm grateful to the Minister for giving me. First of all, the problem with asking for statements is we have asked for many and none of them come forward. We get them drip, drip, drip over weeks. This is an urgent issue, which is why I went through the process of a topical question and an urgent question. When that was not successful, the next opportunity for a member to raise this is through the business motion. So the Minister could satisfy us all by saying his government will postpone this summit, organise a proper summit that will listen to people and include that in the business statement next week.
Minister.
Well, he knows it's utter nonsense that we don't bring forward statements that have been requested. There was a statement requested on the situation. He cares to listen. I'm happy to spend on the situation at Alexander Dennis. And we brought that statement today. That statement was made at the request of the Conservative Party. So we do bring these things forward. And indeed, let me come to the matter at hand in relation to the business motion, because I do thank Liz Smith for actually speaking to the business motion. She makes the point that she's already raised the issue with the Minister for Children, Young People and the promise around a statement on the matter that she raises. A commitment has been made by the Minister that there will be a statement. I have, and this speaks to the point. The Conservative business manager has in fact raised this issue with me. I've made clear to him that we will lodge a statement on this matter. I've made that point to all business managers, and indeed I've made that commitment to the presiding officer. So I make that commitment here and now. We will bring forward a statement, and I'll bring forward a revised business motion, subject of course to the agreement of Bureau next week.
Thank you. The question is that motion 18921 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 18922. In the name of Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, on timetabling of a bill at stage 1. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now, and I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion, therefore. The question is that motion 18922 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau motion 18923 on committee remits. And I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. There are 2 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that motion 18883, in the name of Angela Constance, on Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill at stage 3 be agreed. And as this is a motion to pass the bill, the question must be decided by division, so there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system. Thank you. The question is that motion 18883, in the name of Angela Constance, on Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill at stage 3 be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. Point of order, Willie Rennie.
I forgot to use Beatrice Wishart's proxy vote. She would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. We'll ensure that's recorded. Point of order, Michael Mara.
In a very similar circumstance, I didn't use Paul O'Kane's vote. I attempted to, but it didn't work, so he would have voted no.
Thank you. Mr Marrow will ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on motion 18883 in the name of Angela Constance is yes 71, no 46. There was one abstention. The motion is therefore agreed and the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill is passed. Thank you. Thank you. The final question is that motion 18923 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on committee remit be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed, and that concludes decision time, and we will move on to members' business in the name of Bill Kidd and followed by Pam Gossel.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McMillan.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.